Hello there, welcome to the Saroy channel and welcome to my Omnibus series. I've got so many of these omnibuses that are going to come out so that you'll be able to listen to an hour's worth of stories, which I know you're going to love. You know, the thing is that telling stories is such a fine art, and it's something that was practiced hundreds of years ago when people didn't have the technology that we have today. And everyone would gather around the fire and listen to a wonderful story. And also, what is so wonderful about a story is that personally, I think it is the best way to go to sleep. Every night when I go to bed, I always listen to stories. And that's something that parents used to do with their children. It's something that they still do with their children. There's nothing better than a good story. And so I hope you're going to enjoy this series. And before we start, I just want to say, do subscribe to my channel because you don't want to miss out on anything. Because I'm in for the long haul and I want to make sure that you get the most stunning stories to go to bed with at night or to listen to when you want to be one of those people sitting beside the fire and listening. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel and let's get started. I hope you're going to enjoy the omnibus.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, the rain began to vigorously pelt down the roof, splashing against the windows of our high-rise family apartment where I lived with my mother and my brother Curtis, in the south-east side of Boston, which is South Boston, not quite the same as south-east Boston. I know it's confusing. Our home is close to the seaport in the coastal downtown region, infiltrated by a plethora of young people. It's a young, tech-savvy city, with lots of students, colleges and universities. The city has a dense, walkable downtown, with lots of crooked one-way roads. It's situated close to bountiful bars, avant-garde restaurants, eclectic and sometimes whimsically twee coffee shops. There's a beach with a running path that people like to use for running or walking. People think everyone in Boston is a die-hard liberal, which is not 100% true. I am certainly not. I'd hate to be typecast because I live here. Many people these days are swinging more Republican, so things are changing in the political compass of this place, rather like a dripping tap. But most people prefer to keep their political allegiances, whatever they may be, extremely private, which is fair enough. Although you do get those types who are offended if you're not rooting for the same side, as they are, and will be quick to tell you why your opinions are misguided. Let's just say folks here can be tough and very opinionated sometimes. But when you crack the outer shell, they can be pretty cool underneath it all. But don't expect them to greet you down the sidewalk, as that ain't likely to happen. It's not that their inclination is to be unfriendly, but more like a polite, rather evasive reserve that somewhat subdues their ebullience. A quarter of the population here boasts Irish ancestry, so on St. Patrick's Day you'll see people walking around sporting green garlands and hats, very proud to boast in an Irish lineage. Life has never been easy growing up in a family with a mother who had a bipolar disorder that had never been fully diagnosed. Somehow avoiding psychologists like the plague was her way of living in denial, her artful technique of pretending there were no hiccups or stumbling blocks in her life. If you didn't admit there was a problem, then there wasn't one, so to speak. My mother could be 1 minute in the most enervated mood, that was so positive, so exuberant. Then her mood would crash like a thunderous ocean wave thrashing against the rocks. She could be heard throwing pots and pans around the kitchen as she screamed out in frustration. When she became irate like this, it was a scary experience indeed, as heaven help you if you got caught up in the spiralling crossfire of her wrath. Not that she ever raised her fists to us, but on 2 occasions me and my brother were clobbered by a dirty trainer, with the smell more offensive than the clobbering itself. But I hasten to say that was not a pleasant experience that we ever cared to repeat. My dad had walked out on us when I was about 7 years old. I think he couldn't take my mother's emotional mood swings a moment longer. He'd had enough, so he filed for divorce. How could I blame him for that? As if I was wearing his shoes, I would have done exactly the same thing. I'd always known that as soon as I was old enough, I would leave my mother's home so fast, following in the footsteps of those before me, eager to disappear from her indomitable grasp. I don't want you to get the impression I don't love my mother. I do, but living with someone with precarious, fluctuating moods can rarely wear away at you. For me personally, I found my mother hard work. Luckily, the apartment where we lived was our saving grace, and was actually in my father's name, so could not be sold or mortgaged without his say-so. Even though he was out of our lives, he kept his eye on everything through a friend of his, whom regularly visited us, and reported back to my dad. To be fair to my father, he sent us birthday cards and Christmas presents every year, but we had no recollection of him at all. In the beginning, he left my mother money in her account, and every month he did a direct transfer into her account to provide for childcare costs, but we never saw much of it, as it invariably was spent on alcohol and cigarettes. It seemed to us as if my dad disappeared into the sunset, never to be heard from or seen again, apart from a stray present or card here and there. I knew he was out there somewhere, probably with a wife and family of his own, which meant I might have some stepbrothers or sisters out there, which was something I occasionally thought about, but to date have never been able to uncover. But here is still hoping. My mother's own parents were estranged from her, and every job she attained lasted barely 2 minutes before she was given her marching orders by well-meaning bosses who were crumbling under the arduous strain of dealing with such a vacillating, unstable character. Something had to give under the weight of that pressure, and it was always my mother's job that ended up being folded up like an old camping chair and discarded. Even though my mother had a plethora of boyfriends over the years, she was not an unattractive woman, but when her suitors were exposed to the dark side of her personality, they would scurry away like frightened rabbits on the prairie, hurrying to their burrows, but I never blamed them for that. I mean, how could I? I do remember on one occasion having a heart-to-heart with my mother about her many issues when she was in a more sober, reflective state of mind, and open to reason, where she was bold enough to examine her life through a microscope, and was not taking such easy offence to a critical analysis, which was unusual for her. She was prone to being highly sensitive, easily offended, although she wasn't afraid to give it as good as she got when the need arose, and could become indignantly hot-headed at times. "Why does everybody leave me? You kids have only stayed with me because I'm your mother. You've got nowhere else to go. Look at me. I'm such a mess. I can't keep a job nor a man. I have no friends. Even they desert me. The only people that speak to me these days are the bartenders at the bar across the road. They have to be civil to me, don't they? Because I'm paying them good money. I overheard one saying to his friend, 'That woman is a liability, as loopy as a fruitcake. She drives me nuts.' It really hurt. 'Mum, you have a psychological condition,' I told her lovingly, giving her a warm, encouraging hug. 'My friend Beryl believes you have bipolar disorder, just like her mother does. But it's easily sorted out. It's nothing to feel ashamed about. Like any condition, physical or mental, it just needs to be addressed. You need to visit a psychologist, get evaluated and medicated, your mood stabilized. That way you will function better in society. Maybe keep a job, make some new friends.' My friend Beryl's mother had her job for over 8 years. She's been married for 10, still is married to the same man. Things would never have worked out for her so well without medication. There's nothing wrong, Mum, in admitting you need help." "I can't possibly go to a psychologist, Howie," my mother had said, looking appalled. "There's nothing wrong with me. Do you get that? I'm just a little moody, that's all. It's possibly my hormones flying all over the place. Maybe they're out of alignment. Women's hormones can screw with you, but you wouldn't know about that, would you?" "Then see a doctor," I begged. But would she listen? Absolutely not. Denial was her very best friend, who had held her hand every day of her life, actively discouraging her from doing anything that might bring her condition into the bold light of day, to admit that she actually had a problem. The trouble was that me and my brother Curtis had to bear the brunt of her mood swings. That was never easy. When my mother's mood became foul, She would self-medicate, always turning to alcohol, to lift her out of the pit of desolation, so she could avoid hitting rock bottom, like a stone sinking to the bottom of a lake. She could get that low, hanging around someone draped in the dark clouds of their hopelessness, which she wore like an overcoat that she refused to remove, was hard going. She had a love-hate relationship with the dark side of herself, whose company, although not pleasant, she still chose to entertain. Suffice to say, she would drag her oppressed state of mind like the dirty laundry in a basket across the road from our apartment and indulge herself at the local bar, whiling away the long lonely hours in a desolate-looking place, getting inebriated and flirting tirelessly with anyone on two legs that was buying drinks. Let's just say a free drink from a perfect stranger that she could easily charm with a flutter of her eyelashes was always welcome, and procured no dent in her pocket. After an afternoon spent at the bar, she would return home, looking like a sorry, wretched sight. She would stumble back home bladdered. Her legs would wobble unsteadily beneath her, like a newborn foal that was actually learning to walk. She would pass out on the couch, collapse, and fall into a deep sleep, her snores filtering through the house in strangled snorts. I knew then you cannot change the sound of an echo, and that my mother was resolutely determined to stay stuck in her ways, although beneath the veneer I knew she longed to change, but she lacked the courage to do it. She lacked the courage to take that quintessential fork in the road of her life, as toiling down the same laborious path seemed infinitely more preferable. If there was anything positive about my mother's bipolar disorder, it had harnessed within me an extreme desire to be independent. So from the early age of 14, I had found various jobs which enabled me to contribute significantly towards family groceries, which would never have been bought if my mother had got her hands on my money. But I guarded it with my life, hiding it secretly under loose wooden panels under my bed. She liked to spend her money on cigarettes and alcohol. The money my father sent her in order to care for us was spent to accommodate her addictions. My mother managed her alcohol better than most, I will admit, and it did seem to diffuse her anger somewhat. So for that I was grateful. Yet I wished with all my heart she would have had the courage and conviction to actually seek help. It would be lovely to be given some breathing space from the roller coaster of our lives, to live around normality for a change. Indeed, I didn't know what a normal life really was, but as one of my friends so eloquently put it, what's normal? We all have our issues. Nobody's life is seamless. I had a sneaking suspicion he was absolutely right about that. My brother was a simple young man. He was on the autism spectrum, which meant he was set in his ways, woefully abhorred any changes in the routines of life, and was rigidly structured in everything he did. A quiet soul, an unassuming character, who didn't like to interact with strangers much. Although he was my older brother, I had to take care of him. He was not capable of looking after himself, for an extended period of time, that is. But a few hours left to his own devices, he was perfectly fine, and I loved him with my whole heart. As the rain pelted down, it stilled my troubled mind. My brother was sitting in front of the television set, with the face of an animated cherub, watching The Lord of the Rings for the 1,000th time over, with the enthused excitement of seeing it for the very first time. My brother was a handsome boy, with childlike wispy ringlets of blonde spiralling hair that bounced around his square-shaped masculine face in a Nordic swirl. His piercing blue eyes were fringed by long dark lashes. His body was naturally muscled, without engaging in tireless workouts in the gym, for my brother did not interest himself in such trivialities. Without the autism, I imagine the woman would be champing at the bit to date him, for he could easily have graced the covers of a glamour magazine, without a problem. But the annoying thing was that my brother couldn't have given a toss if he'd had the face of a robber's dog or not, as his looks were as meaningless to him as whether he had milk on his Cheerios at breakfast. He liked Cheerios both ways, with milk and without, which meant his looks were literally wasted on him. On several occasions he'd been scouted by model agencies. Let's just say I wasn't so lucky in the looks department. My brother was blessed with good looks, and me mediocre brains. I wasn't bad looking, but the pendulum swung in the average direction, as far as my looks were concerned. as did my grades, sports ability, and artistic prowess. I had blonde straw-like hair that lacked my brother's buoyancy, was cut in a spunky hairstyle to make me look a little bit more arresting, but my wispy hair needed to be dipped in a plethora of hair gel to maintain those hedgehog-like spikes. My facial features were unremarkable and forgettable, with eyes the colour of insipid coffee. My body was a little on the skinny side, having been atrociously defeated by multiple beleaguered attempts in the gym, when I surrendered myself to the horrifying realization that I just wasn't going to beef up significantly to make all this arduous exercise worth my while. So for me, average dappled my life. I was reasonably accepting about this. In truth, I would hate to be the kind of person that turned heads wherever I went. It was so much better to melt into the background, to remain invisible. As the rain bucketed down in cats and dogs, and the trees in the neighbourhood twinkled with glittering opaque droplets of rain, I found myself lost in my own thoughts. My mother was sitting in a dingy bar across the street, getting bladdered as usual, while I was pondering what I was going to do about my English project for college. I was expected to write an old person's autobiography about their life and times, of someone significantly older than myself. We were informed by our teacher that we would be surprised about the treasured stories that were contained within every older person. It's up to you to squirrel those stories out of these people. I want stories that are exciting, so don't you dare disappoint me, she'd informed us. My grandparents on both sides of the family were not involved in our lives, so who could I ask to help me with this project? It suddenly dawned on me that I could go to a retirement home and see if anyone there would be willing to talk to me. With that inspirational thought sizzling away in my mind like a firework sparkler, I hastily grabbed my waterproof windbreaker, zipping myself beneath its protective folds, covering my head with the hoodie. "Where are you going?" asked my brother, with an expressionless face, as if he wasn't interested either way what my answer actually would be. "I won't be gone long," I said, knowing I didn't want to have to explain my project to my brother. It was easier to fob him off with brief answers, rather than to go into in-depth explanations about my English project. I knew it was raining, and potentially I could get soaked, but this idea pestered me. I was determined to strike while the iron was hot. Could I potentially find an older person willing to talk to me about their life of yesteryear? I knew there was a retirement place not too far away from us. I'd noticed it before, so I got into my mother's 20-year-old rusted Honda Accord, which I'd pretty much taken over, as my mother normally was too drunk to drive and couldn't risk acquiring a DUI, so I did all the grocery shopping for her, everything for the family, and that worked out remarkably well for us. I dropped the car into gear quickly, trundling down the clean roads of Boston, merging with the traffic and then veering onto the I-35. Finally I hit cross-town. I was admiring the wet sheen of the road. From the rain, I could see either side of the road under the vigorous motion of my windscreen wipers that were brushing the water aside with brisk rhythmic motions. I observed the attractive paved sidewalks, planted up with long lines of trees, typically surrounded by the bricked high-rise buildings that plundered the skyline, wearing the influences of the Puritan settlers who brought with them the indelible hallmarks of English architecture here that morphed into Georgian and colonial styles further down the line. Boston wears its rich history with a hoity-toity pomp and ceremony, a pride it doesn't want to shake off, but is only too glad to celebrate, with a vain-glorious haughtiness that makes many believe our city is rather stuck up and conceited. It would seem the streets are littered with the stereotype pompous, smug-looking buildings and structures everywhere you go, that appear to bask and sunbathe in the indulgence of their own self-importance. One of them being what I perceived was the retirement home that squatted proudly on its foundations, as like so many of the prominent high-rise buildings here, the outside of the building is supported by thick ornate sculptural columns, so typically seen in Greek architecture. I'm ever thankful to find a parking spot on the opposite side of the street, as I believe I've spotted this retirement home. I'm sure that's it, which I understand is devoted to military retirees, whom I figured could have some scintillating stories to tell. I walk over to the glass doors of the building that open up like the doors of a bank. I enter the marble lobby, which meanders curvaceously into a prestigious reception area, which is similar to what you might expect to see in any office building, but grander and more lavish, leaving me to conclude that people staying here have got pockets that run deep. The floors of the reception area are aligned with expensive, ornate, heavily designed carpets, decorated in fabulously rich designs, like what you would expect to see in the Bellagio in Las Vegas. And there is a swanky modern version of a chandelier, shimmering from the high ornate ceiling. A young woman is sitting behind a very swanky avant-garde reception desk that looks like an ornate piece of modern art. It curls and sweeps into a pleasing symmetry. The white walls are adorned with illustrious pictures of elderly people, all in military uniforms, boasting medals and ribbons. There's even a framed letter from Dwight Eisenhower, congratulating someone for their service to the military, and of course the war effort. The writing is faded, the edges of the letter curled up and rather warped. The ink so faded, I can barely read what it says, but I catch one line which reads, "It's men like your son who fight for our great country that make me proud to call myself American." The receptionist is twiddling her long sweeping curls of dark hair, wearing a rather bemused expression upon her face. She rather reminds me of a dark-haired version of Marilyn Monroe. I make my approach towards her desk. She raises a perfectly manicured eyebrow at me, without saying a word. I can see their essential oil diffusers, burning the sweet fragrance of lemongrass all over the place, to clandestinely cover the other less agreeable smells that lurk beneath the fragrant infusions, like a whiff of bleach that didn't fail to grab my attention the moment I entered the building. There's an old man circling the area in a wheelchair, with a fixed, demented grin on his face, but it was like he was in another world, miles away from the reception area. I didn't exist in his current reality, any more than he existed in mine. He looked through me like a translucent pane of glass, as if I was not there, spun around in his wheelchair, with a behaviour more akin to a child than an 80-year-old man. I got a sense he was spinning around in the vortexes of his mind, accessing galaxies that do not exist in our world. But his childlike demeanour seemed so alien in a body that was withered from age, with skin firmly clinging to his tight bones, and a muscle definition that is clearly expired. I don't know why, but the way the receptionist has looked at me has almost certainly ruffled my feathers. Fleeting doubts surge into my mind as to whether my plan to come here was such a good idea after all. Maybe it would be better to give chase, to get the hell out of this place. The receptionist is looking at me cynically. She pipes, "How may I help you, young man?" Her eyes hover over me like a questioning voucher, trying to make sense of what I'm doing here. They move up my body in a vertical sweep, from the shoes of my feet to my eyes. Her facial expression remains fixed, so I can't exactly tell whether I meet with her approval or not, for she gives nothing away. "I'd like to see the manager of this place, if I may. I need to talk to him." She raises her brow cynically again. "That's a bit presumptuous of you, is it not? For your information, Mr. Granger is a very busy man. What makes you feel you can intrude upon his schedule? From what I can see, you're not exactly a visitor here, nor a salesperson, nor do you work here. So why would you want to see him? If you're looking for a job here, I can give you an application form to fill in. But Mr. Granger doesn't see anyone willy-nilly. It is by appointment only, I'm afraid, unless, of course, the situation is extremely urgent." "I'm sorry to say, but from what I can see, there's no reason why I should call him on your behalf, unless you can persuade me otherwise. And pardon me for saying this, but you haven't convinced me that you are worthy of his attention or time." "I'm from Boston College, majoring in communications, media studies, broadcasting, and public relations," I explain. "I'm doing an English project. As far as I'm concerned, I really do need to see Mr. Granger. I'm doing a biography of someone old. I need to write about their lives, about their struggles and triumphs, stuff like that. Everything that defines who they have become today." "Well, I can't promise you Mr. Granger will see you," she says, "but I guess it's worth a try." I saw him bobbing around the dining hall at lunchtime, so I guess he may not be as busy as usual. But we shall see, if I can get him for you. I've always had a soft spot for an aspiring writer. I wouldn't exactly call myself that. But thank you, ma'am. I'm most obliged. Don't thank me yet, says the young lady. My name is Louise, by the way, she says, lifting up the receiver. Yes, Mr. Granger. I've got a visitor in reception here. Claims he'd like a quick word with you. No, don't worry about that. He doesn't appear to be selling anything. She pops the phone back on the receiver, smiling up brightly at me. Mr. Granger will be here in 2 ticks. What seems like a moment later, a man emerges through the doorway, sporting a neat crop of salt and pepper-coloured hair, a symmetrical face, ocean blue eyes. He's thin and lanky, enviably over 6 foot tall, and he wears his height well. He's dressed in a smart blue blazer, adorned with gold buttons, a crisp white shirt, a gold-spotted cravat, a mustard-coloured waistcoat, navy blue chinos, and a pair of smart coffee-brown crocodile-skin loafers. He flashes me a bright smile and reaches out to shake my hand warmly. His grip is firm and very congenial. So what do I owe this pleasure, young man? How may I be of service to you? My name is Howard Turner, although my friends call me Howie for short. I was wondering if I could do a biography on one of your elderly residents here for my English assignment. I just need to speak to someone here who may be able to share about some poignant memories in their lives. Mr. Errol Granger looks nonplussed. He furrows his brows awkwardly, glances over at me with an odd expression upon his face, while he wrings his hands, almost as if washing them under the tap. I guess it's his way of sifting through his thoughts, discerning the wood from the trees, so to speak. Why did you come here, young man? I mean, do you have any elderly grandparents that couldn't help you with this project of yours? I do, but I don't, I say grudgingly. I don't even know where they live these days. Last time I heard they were living in Bear Canyon, in Albuquerque, about 33 hours' drive from here. Well, they haven't been in touch with us for years. It would be awkward getting in touch with them now, after all this time, I think. I don't even know if they still stain the earth. And even if they do, I think contacting them could get awfully prickly. I had found dealing with family was as complicated as walking through a thistle patch, as the path never ran smoothly when it came to my mother's side of the family, especially possibly as most of them seemed to have inherited her wavering, fickle moods. I continue. I'm not sure I'd even want to speak to them either, if I'm being perfectly frank with you. They've shown absolutely no interest in me. Why should I not extend them the very same courtesy that they've shown me? I say sarcastically. Oh dear, I sense I've hit a bit of a raw nerve there, says Mr. Granger, the contours of his face softening compassionately. I quite understand why you feel this way. If the boot were on the other foot and my grandparents had shown me such disregard, well, I probably wouldn't like to know them either, let alone interview them about their lives, of which I clearly, as their grandson, played no influential part. As the good Lord says in his precious word, we reap what we sow. Let me just say, young man, that the residents here are possibly not quite the right candidates for you to interview. I mean, most of our elderly patients all come from military backgrounds. Some of them are war heroes who can't take care of themselves anymore. The vast majority of the folk here are suffering from Alzheimer's and dementia, or other neurological conditions. If they can't even recognize their own faces, or remember their children's names, I'm quite sure the details of their lives have been extinguished a long time ago, which is a dreadful pity, as I think some of our residents may have riveting stories to tell that would be well worth hearing. But neurological illnesses spare no mercy on their victims. My heart leaps over the edge of disappointment and regret. It was just my luck to choose an elderly nursing home where the residents couldn't even remember their own names. But surely there must be someone I could talk to, someone whose mind is not stewing in jello. Well, let me think about that. Mr. Granger thinks for a moment on his feet. I could let you talk to Mr. Nicholas Ridgway, he says reflectively, but I can't promise you he will be willing to talk to you. The man is in his 50s and is the youngest man here, but because of his military affiliation, so to speak, we took him in. Nicholas, I believe, was involved in that military expedition. I think it was in 2001 or 2002, when the United States invaded Afghanistan with a clear objective to defeat Al-Qaeda. Regretfully, he's now dying from pancreatic cancer, but he does have his good days. You stay here for a moment, he says. I'll see what I can do for you. I can't promise anything. Keep your fingers crossed. Moments later, Mr. Granger re-emerges in the reception area with a huge grin on his face that is so wide I tremble in my shoes with excitement. I can tell by his thrilled expression that the news is very good. I'm very pleased to inform you, young man, that Nicholas Ridgway will gladly see you. He's had a very good day today. He has more bad ones than good ones, so it's possibly a good idea you take some notes down for yourself with him right now. I'm led into Mr. Ridgway's bedroom. I'm surprised how lovely the room is, as it doesn't look like your stereotype, mediocre pedestrian, run-of-the-mill hospital room. It is more like a luxurious suite in a grandiose, rather upmarket hotel, with fabulous upholstered furnishings, long glamorous curtains that swish above the lavish carpeting, large windows that overlook arresting views on the backyard that is sprinkled with oak trees, beds of roses, viridescent manicured turf. The only thing that gives the game away is that this patient's room has a hospital bed, along with an oxygen mask and a drip, the accessories clearly needed for a patient. The nurse has propped up Mr. Ridgway's head against the pillows. He is sitting up straight in bed. His mellow hazel eyes, buried in the back of his sunken sockets, appear to be twinkling. He's wearing a pair of pale blue and white pinstripe pyjamas. His cheeks are dented, rather like hollowed puddles, while a leathery jaundiced skin clings tightly to his face. His mouth is puckered and dry. He manages a smile of ancient-looking teeth that are as ravaged as his withering, frail body. I can see the cancer is not kind to your physical appearance. It pugnaciously hijacks your youth with a ravenous greed and eats up your energy reserves. This man doesn't only look like a mummified corpse, but he's the thinnest person I've ever encountered. His arms are like withering twigs. I'd say he looks closer to 90 than 50, and for a moment my ebullient enthusiasm nosedives like a plane that has lost its wing and comes hurtling to the ground. I mean, how can I possibly interview a man who looks like he's hanging onto the precipice of his life by a fine silvery thread that could potentially snap at any given moment? Even my questions could literally be too much for him. "Hello, young man," says the voice that emerges from his throat, that sounds more like a raspy croak. My eyes dart towards a bedside table. I see a gilded frame photograph of a relatively young, handsome man, wearing military uniform, smiling brightly into the camera. "Is that you?" I ask, looking stunned, unable to hide the obvious shock written all over my face. "Yes, don't look so surprised. That was me in 2002, when I went to Afghanistan. Wasn't too bad looking back then, I have to say," he chuckles, "but cancer has a way of ruining your robust health, shall we say. So you were a soldier in Afghanistan. Did you enjoy being in the military? I suppose that's a lame question to ask you, but I don't get how anyone could possibly enjoy fighting in a war. I'm no wimp, but I will tell you this, I would hate that. The best time of my life, son, was had in the military. The friendships I made back then were like gold dust. The men on my platoon were more like brothers to me than mere acquaintances. If there's one thing I'm proud of, it's fighting for my country and for the freedom of people around the globe. Sometimes, son, we have to fight for what we believe in with all our might. All my life I've been fighting battles, but I'm fighting the hardest battle of all, with this goddamned pancreatic cancer And this is a battle, I regret to say, that despite a positive outlook, I will surely not win. Worse than Afghanistan, I ask. The cancer, I mean. Of course, you bet, he says. Cancer is no joke. So why exactly are you here, son? Why do you want a biography of me? I'm not exactly the most interesting character on this planet. You could do a lot better than me. I'm sure others have much more riveting stories than I do. Well, a biography is a bit extreme, I say. I rarely like stories about incidents or experiences in your life that you believe may have defined you. Our teacher is keen for us to make the stories exciting. She says that stories are the joy of our lives, but they need to be told well, and some excitement added to the mix would be much appreciated. Sounds like your English teacher has got rather big expectations. I hope not to disappoint you. But you want interesting, young man. I'll give you interesting. I can even add something incredulous and outlandish to the equation as well. Now you're talking, I say.
Nicholas Ridgway's story in his own words. Well, I stepped down on foreign soil in Afghanistan for the first time in my life in March of 2002 in a firefight against Al-Qaeda and Taliban fighters. It was spring back then in Afghanistan, which can be rather rainy during the day, cold at night. And when I say cold, believe me, those temperatures can almost certainly drop down very, very low. And when you're out there in the wilderness, getting cold is tough going, believe me. The landscape is also unforgiving, landlocked, shall we say, tall forbidding mountains, dry deserts with treacherous mountain peaks, covered in glistening white snow, almost the entire year round. The Afghans themselves were living in the fertile valleys between the mountains, growing crops, tending to their animals. One night, as everybody is fast asleep, me and my best friend Rupert are on night duty. Let's just say we slept whenever we could, but we were trained to be up like a rocket if enemy fire was serendipitously approaching us. I remember there was an icy cold wind blowing. The night was tenebrously dark, very austere, sombre, with a faint scattering of silvery stars, and a moon that kept creeping behind the hovering mist. I was on night patrol with Rufus, watching the night very carefully, very assiduously, with night vision goggles that are quick to discern anything unusual in the environment, anything that is remotely suspicious. They are quick to detect infrared heat signatures on anything. Everyone, as I say, was fast asleep, behind a rocky outcrop, aligned with a plethora of sandbags. In the early morning of that day, the stillness of the valley had been deceptively tranquil, and it's easy to be fooled by the whiff of serenity, but ours was soon disturbed by a grueling barrage of bullets that had taken us unaware. But we moved quickly upon the Taliban, with a measure of success, but we weren't without our own casualties. One of my dear friends had his torso ripped apart from his legs with one blow. So we had casualties, and many of them. Sometimes I believe the greatest casualties of war were the perpetual fatigue, the tiredness, the emotional fractures, the nervous exhaustion as well, as living on a razor-sharp knife edge of your adrenaline is never easy. One minute things are peacefully quiet. The next moment danger is stealthily creeping upon you, rather like a panther hiding in the dark shadows that you need to watch all the time, lest it should get too uncomfortably close. The one thing you never get used to in war is the way people die. You need a stomach of steel to cope with that. Of course, at our military bases, we've prepared for wartime situations, even how to cope should we become a prisoner of war, how to overcome interrogation from the enemy camp, and so forth. But nothing ever prepares you for the real deal, when you know this isn't a mock military exercise. This is the real thing. It tastes bitter, feels exceedingly different. No amount of preparation at your military base can prepare you for the realities of war. It's like being a goldfish lowered into a shark tank, and you become blazingly aware that everywhere you look, danger is raising its ugly head. So you need to hide, melt into the landscape like butter, adapt to the mountainous terrain like a chameleon. Let's just say you become poignantly aware of your own mortality. You begin to discern there is always a possibility you might not be returning home,
So in some ways, while you're out there on the front line, you've never felt more alive. You accept that dying for one's country is always an honour. Let's just say every man has such an incredible pride towards America, the land of the mighty, the great and the free. Most of the men have loved ones at home, and so dying is not on the cards for them. They want to return home to their beloved wives and kids, so they're determined to defeat death at every hurdle. But at the same time, if their blood is spilled on the soil, they knew that their deaths were not in vain. Let's just say for many with the warrior spirit mentality, they almost certainly approach the war like a football game. This is just one you have to win. Losing is never an option, nor does it engage your mindset. Our Sarge always used to say, "Fight with valour. Doubt not your ability to triumph in every situation. Believe in victory. Visualize your return safely home." You become very close to your peers. Humour can become crude, language sometimes unseemly, but no one cares a jot. It's an emotional release of stewing emotions that need to be expressed. Suffice to say, adrenaline is nudging and pestering you all the time, reminding you that it might just spike in any given moment, when you begin to sense danger in the air. It's amazing when you're out in the isolated barren wilderness, with a heart that misses a beat, ears alert to the slightest sound that might grab your attention. You're sensitive to an intuition that becomes so much more pronounced when you know you could be in perilous danger. I had not believed in a third eye before, that can assiduously see around the curve of time. But after my experiences in this war, I knew that within us is an inbuilt sensitive mechanism that warns us when danger is looming ever closer. For many of us have sensed it before it reared up its ugly head to catch us off guard. It was a bitter cold, very cruel night in Afghanistan. And as I was saying before, the men in my platoon were catching up on some much-needed sleep. They were sleeping behind sandbags that made up our firing location. 2 of us were on guard duty, keeping alert to any ominous signs or suspicious heat signatures the twilight might fortuitously thrust upon us. For every trained soldier in our platoon, rocketing out of our sleep was a natural reflex deeply ingrained in us, like a well-exercised muscle that was systematically streamlined in its responses, however immediate they may actually be. I could sense a brewing, smouldering tension that clung to the wind, to every single blade of grass. It was an airy, bodeful, spooky feeling, as if I could sense something untoward was about to happen. My friend Rupert informed me that he was feeling more on edge as usual. Maybe we should wake the rest of the platoon and the sergeant up, but that would be crazy. Why rouse the sergeant from a precious much-needed sleep based on our uncertain feelings that squeezed our chests tightly, leaving our throats dry and scratchy? There was no reason to be too hasty. That was when we see it, first through our night vision goggles, a large heat signature shaped like the most massive King Kong-sized human being. For some reason, I don't fire, nor does Rupert, who was sometimes also called Rufus. By all accounts, firing at the approaching threatening heat signature is what we should normally do. It's an instinctive reaction for us. Rupert is saying, "What the f*** is that?" And I'm saying, "What in God's name?" Rupert and I feel a powerful, daunting revelation. A deep voice in our gut, rather like the voice of God, warning us not to shoot. Something causes us to freeze over, like an ice statue. This has never transpired in my military career, ever. I kid you not, our hands are clasping our rifles, but they've lost their ability to move. We can see this dark silhouette moving towards us, like a huge black cardboard cutout of King Kong. It's so Herculean in size. I know instinctively that it's not human, as no human can possibly tower at 8 foot tall, and appear to be built like an army tank. There is something white flapping on this thing's shoulders, rather like a billowing white sail on a boat, but by contrast to this thing, it's quite obscure, almost as if whatever this thing is, it's artfully wearing a white scarf around its neck. I should have been afraid, but I was fixed to the spot by a sense of awe, which stole my anxiety. and even my adrenal response, so that my whole presence of mind had been wilfully ensnared by a dreamy, illusory state, where I couldn't discern the difference between what was real and what wasn't. For a brief moment my thoughts are muddled, confused, rather disorientated. In a trice the ground cover that obscured the moon dissipates, while a piercing trajectory of moonlight cascades over this idiosyncratic being, so that its figure is now fully illuminated by the light. I know at once it's a Bigfoot. What the hell, I'm thinking. I can't believe this. Any moment now I'm going to wake up and tell everybody about my outlandish weird dream I had last night, about the Bigfoot I saw in Afghanistan. Yet I know that I'm very much awake. This is really happening. The creature is now standing yards away from us. We both have enough sense not to shoot at it. He's covered in long flowing dark hair. Its prominent pyramid-shaped head folds into its shoulders in a neat sweep. Its face is alarmingly human. He looks more like those pictures of Neanderthal or early man, with some primate influences to his appearance, notably the over-length of his arms and the distinctive head shape. But beyond this, he is so human in every single regard, but clearly possesses night vision. His eyes give off a blazing, bright yellow eyeshine. It is what is on the back of his shoulders that actually gets my attention. Would you believe it? It's an Afghan girl. She's wearing a white nightdress. She's only about 12 years old, with big black eyes filled with a fearful trepidation. The Bigfoot places her gently on the ground. He points in the direction of the village. "Bad man," we hear in our heads. "He tried to take her. I leave her with good men." The Bigfoot pats the girl on the shoulders gently, as if to give her an encouraging nudge. He turns around and glides away, while this Afghan girl stares at us both, at first rather uncertain. But I speak to her kindly, and although she doesn't understand a single word of what I'm saying, she is soothed and reassured by the comforting sound of my words, and doesn't need much encouragement to come running into my arms. The girl's tears saturate my army uniform, while I cradle her in my arms, rocking her gently. Her sobs immediately wake up the entire platoon. Everyone is bewildered by the presence of this strange Afghan girl in our firing location. I mean, this does not ever happen. The interpreter informs us that the young girl's father, Abdul Hanan, recently died, so the uncle Abdullah decided to move in and become man of the house, delighting in taking over his brother's household. It would seem he was an intimidating man who was already sleeping in his brother's wife's bed, even though he had a wife and kids of his own. By all accounts, he seemed to feel he had inherited the right of taking charge over his brother's family, now that his brother was deceased. He revelled in what he saw were his privileges as the new man of the household. Little Morsel, the Afghan girl, described Abdullah's eyes as becoming deranged, maddened, crazed. He was brutishly hostile towards her. He frenziedly wrestled with his own clothes, flinging them to the floor haphazardly, so that he stood before her totally naked. Little Morsel was slow to react. She was seized by a fearful shock that rendered her frozen to the spot, her dark, sultry eyes round with terror, her little jaw hanging wide open in bewilderment, as she pondered to herself what her uncle was doing. Whatever it was, she knew it wasn't good. Abdullah was pressing her down on her body, his weight bearing down on her so hard that she could barely breathe. She buckled under his heaving contours of flesh. She was so terrified and couldn't fight back. She thought she was going to die. She used her mouth and bit him as hard as she could on the arm, so that blood gushed and oozed out of the open wound. Abdullah reacted. He pulled away from her in disgust, his arm throbbing in pain. This was the quintessential opportunity for Morsel to hightail it, and her legs did not hesitate. She ran to her favourite spot, the fertile valley where the animals grazed. Abdullah, now fueled by an incandescent rage, thundered after little Morsel. He managed to grab her. The man began to tear away at her nightdress, but he was stopped, dead in his tracks. A huge growl permeated the night air, followed by thunderous heaving footsteps that galloped out of the tenebrous shadows. Then there he was, an obscure, hazy, Herculean-sized dark silhouette that loomed towards them at the speed of light. Abdullah was flung to the ground. He tried to wrestle his opponent, but it was too late. He was no match for this creature, whom with his powerful hand twisted his head off, threw it into the valley like a ball. Morsel said she watched it bounce and roll. She felt so terribly happy. Her uncle could not hurt her any more. A relief flooded over her, like a refreshing, renewing rain shower. Morsel reported that when her dad was alive, Abdullah appeared to be a good man, but apparently his wife had always described him as like a caged tiger. But no one knew what she meant, until now, when the reality of the man's character, buried under the curtain of deceptive deceit, had come rearing to the surface. Little Morsel tells the interpreter that Abdullah had changed once her dad died. It was like he wanted to take over their lives and their household, and everyone in her extended family was terrified of him. She told us that as her uncle's head bobbed over the field, a couple of curious cows trotted over to the strange rolling ball to investigate it, crowding around it with a curiosity, followed by a lengthy cacophony of moos. It was rather extraordinary, I was told. The girl realized the Bigfoot had saved her life. She told the interpreter that the creature spoke in a funny way to her. His words entered her head like thoughts, but it was a voice that was clearly audible in her head, that was not her own. The Bigfoot told her he'd take her to good men, who would not hurt her. He threw her onto her shoulders and delivered her to our platoon. She told us that playing as kids, they'd often seen this hairy man, who always seemed to watch over them. She was never afraid of him. None of the kids were. But most of the adults said mean things about the Bigfoots, calling the creature dirty names she didn't dare repeat, as they might actually offend God. The Bigfoots of Afghanistan are known to pilferage crops and animals from farmers, but she knows that the hairy men know good from evil, and like us they need to eat to live, so we shouldn't judge them severely. And as far as this hairy man that saved her life is concerned, she said he was sent from God himself, for she believed after biting Abdullah, he might have raped and killed her. Needless to say, we returned the young girl to her delighted, thrilled mother, and the body of Abdullah was found with his head ripped off, in a way that is hard to fathom. Everyone, including Abdullah's wife and children, was so glad he was dead. Abdullah's wife said if she ever saw the hairy man herself again, she would cook him a feast or leave him food in the meadow, to compensate for his very great kindness. God works in mysterious ways, she told the men, and he sent the Bigfoot to rescue my daughter. Mr. Ridgway takes a deep breath. You see, in every war situation, you can be touched by stories beyond the war. Miraculous stories that get entangled in your own lives. After Mr. Ridgway told me his story, I was floored. I realized I hadn't been writing anything down. This was not a story that I was expecting to hear. If he was going to tell me a story about the war, I was expecting to hear a story of soldiers, bravery, heroism. But this, no, I wasn't expecting to hear this. I was also very impressed by the incredible kindness of the American soldiers that they showed towards the Afghan girl. How did the Bigfoot know these men were so good? Let's just say the American soldiers had killed many a man in these gruesome battles, but this was war. The Bigfoot had an all-knowing insight beyond what we humans could ever understand. He could easily discern a good heart from an evil one, like we might distinguish the good apples and the bad apples in our fruit bowls. Mr. Ridgway, I say, clapping my hands, as tears spill down my cheeks. The story has touched my heart to the quick. Do you know, sir, this is the most incredulous story I've ever heard. It is so out there that I cannot doubt its integrity whatsoever. You cannot make stuff like this up. You just can't. When my teacher said older people had stories to tell, she was certainly not wrong about that. I shake Mr. Ridgway's hand, thank him profusely for his help. 2 months later he's dead. But after I presented my report to my teacher, she called me to one side and said, "Did that really happen?" "Yes, ma'am," I told her. "It surely did." Wow, that is one hell of a story. All these years later, I'm married with a couple of kids of my own. My autistic brother also lives with our family. I carry this story in my heart like a very precious jewel. If you happen to be visiting a bar in Boston during the day, you see an inebriated woman hanging out of the bar, slurring on her words. It's probably my mother. Nothing has changed in that department at all. So there you are. That's my story.
Dear Sarah and all your lovely listeners, my name is George, and I'm from a quaint little picturesque village in Derbyshire in England. And my Bigfoot encounter happened to me in the 80s when I was about 23 years old in Brazil of all places. I grew up with my parents and a brother called Walter, and we had a really phenomenal childhood growing up. We grew up in a world where crime was very uncommon, so as kids we were pretty much able to do as we pleased, without the interference of modern technology or nagging overcautious parents. My brother and I adored horse riding, fishing and cycling, and we could be seen riding our bicycles all over the Derbyshire countryside. When we rode past our village in our bicycle down some of those long country roads, we would invariably cycle past exquisitely beautiful meadows, rolling green hills, and grazing fields of cows, sheep, and even horses. Our little terrier mixed dog called Mops literally followed us everywhere on those exciting adventures and never grew tired. I remember when I was about 10 years old, I was nearly killed by a herd of very inquisitive cows that could quite literally have trampled and stomped me to death. It would seem to be on this occasion that the cows had a probing curiosity and interest towards Mops, my dog, for some bizarre reason. Believe me, inquiring quizzical cows are highly problematic. Before long we were surrounded by cows everywhere that were closing in tightly on us and mooing. We were seconds away from being squashed and pounded to death, unintentionally of course by these creatures because their bodies are so large, and they could easily have flattened us in a heartbeat. I knew of a boy who had actually lost his life this way to a herd of trampeding cows. I knew I had to escape, and luckily I managed to squeeze under a fence and rolled through to the other side, with my body almost shredded to pieces by the barbed wire, and with a rather bedraggled, frightened Mops by my side. I was really shaken up by that incident, and even Mops became painfully wary of cows from that point on, and would simply refuse to go into a field if there was a cow in sight, and who could blame him? Believe it or not, I was once also attacked by a male billy goat, whom had been placed in the field by the farmer to impregnate the female goats. Sadly, I wasn't aware of that at the time. I was accessing the hiking trail I was on through the field, which was legally accessible to all the hikers as a natural shortcut. I remember this creature literally pounded me with its horns so hard that my body was literally black and blue from bruising. I tried to escape this testosterone-driven billy goat, but he was not letting me out of his sight, and he was tearing after me and charging me, using his horns like deadly weapons. Finally, I was rescued by the farmer, who was killing himself laughing and trying desperately not to, because it was comical seeing his billy goat strutting his stuff like that. I hate to admit it, that the Derbyshire villagers could not suppress their amusement and laughter at my very sorry sight, and thought it was terribly funny that a male billy goat had seen me as a potential mating threat, as far as mating was concerned. When I went to the doctor, he was so shocked by how I looked and said, "I'll be damned, I've seen everything now." For some reason the male billy goat thought I was another male competing for mating rights, and he was having none of that. I promise you I've never been so beat up and bruised in my entire life. I soon became the butt of many jokes in the village. When I was a little older, my parents sent us to a prestigious boarding school because my father believed in the significance of a high-quality education to empower and enhance our lives. He was also insistent that we needed to have 3 skills in life because he said that it would be an insurance policy for our financial futures. He felt that you could never ever be certain of the future, so 3 skills would set us up for life. I must say, I have never regretted following his stringent advice. So even though I was an aspiring medical student at the time that was desirous of becoming an orthopaedic surgeon, I had also developed the skills of being a barber, and I learnt how to do that cutthroat shave to perfection at a local barber shop, and became so good at those clean-cut shaves that the barber literally begged me to work for him full-time. My third and final skill would be learning how to become a bricklayer, and so off I went to London to acquire some building skills. I remember how tough it was to get accommodation in London in those days, and you literally had to fight tooth and nail to get a bedsit. I would look for advertisements in the Evening Standard for accommodation, and invariably it would always have gone. Just my luck. It was maddening. There would be queues of people answering just one advert for a single room, so it was a living nightmare looking for affordable, cheap accommodation in London, because the demands were so great. I want to tell you those greedy landlords in London were squirreling away monstrous fortunes, and if you were to complain about something, they would simply tell you could leave because competition for bedsits in London was exceedingly fierce. So in reality, they could literally get away with almost anything and offering you substandard accommodation. But beggars could not be choosers in those days, I'm sad to say. Finally, I was able to find a rather decent-sized bedsit in Bayswater, and as the building project I was working on was in High Street, Kensington, it was in very convenient location for me. The white building where I'd moved to was a classical piece of stylized, sophisticated architecture, but on the inside it was a very different story, as the place was quite literally falling apart, and even the staircases to the rooms were covered in threadbare carpets, and there was only one bathroom to be shared between 5 bedsits, which was absolutely ridiculous. I think the thing that shocked me the most was the electric connections in the rooms that looked so old and precarious you'd be forgiven for thinking that you could literally have a serious electric shock, and you probably could. So I decided that I would never be using an iron in that bedsit. Bayswater was metropolitan and was buzzing with people of all nationalities from all parts of the globe, and there was a great deal of Arabs in the area, wearing their typical white turbans and white loose clothes. In the building where I lived, there were some interesting characters. There was a young girl who was an upmarket cool girl and was visited regularly by her pimp. There were several bricklayers living in their bedsits who were working on local building site. And then there were many bedsits that were occupied by young girls from Brazil who were rarely staying in London for some life experience. And then there was a couple of Australian backpackers in another bedsit. I was enjoying my bricklaying experience, and it was physically strenuous and exhausting hard work, but I learnt a huge amount, and years later I was able to build my own house from scratch, so it was a massive advantage possessing another skill. My father was definitely right about that. One day as I was climbing the stairs to my bedsit, having returned from a hard day of work, I bumped into one of the Brazilian girls in our building, who was sharing a very large bedsit with 3 very friendly Brazilian girls, who invited me to join her for drinks at the local pub, and I thought it sounded like a fabulous idea. The pubs in London were always such a lovely way to relax after a strenuous hard day, and even enjoy a nice game of darts or two. To cut a long story short, I became very good friends with the Brazilian girl, who was called Anka, but it was not a romantic liaison by any strength of the imagination. We just became very close, firm and good friends, and before long Anka told me all about her life in Brazil and begged me to go and stay with her once she had left England and returned home. Once I had acquired my building skills, I returned home to Derbyshire, and my parents encouraged me to go travelling to broaden my horizons for a year or so before I pursued and completed my medical degree. Once again my father told me that travel was character building and good for the soul. He believed it was favourable and valuable to observe other cultures, faiths and lifestyles, and to learn from other people's life experiences. I did not need much encouragement because I loved travelling myself, and that was when I decided to visit Brazil and get reacquainted with Anka, who lived in a very nice neighbourhood in São Paulo. She lived in an upmarket white Portuguese home with seamless 1800s colonial architecture and a touch of neoclassic romantic influences, and it was spacious, open plan, and rarely cosy, well-designed home. It would seem that the garrulous and charming Anka had hundreds and hundreds of friends, and so she hosted numerous parties while I was there. I found the Brazilians to be very gregarious, friendly and congenial, and they just loved a good party and dancing to all hours of the morning. We visited pristine white beaches, and believe me, those beaches were among the most magnificent I've ever seen in the world, I imagine. I travelled all over Brazil, meeting some very interesting characters, and I enjoyed eating delicious Brazilian food. I noticed they love cooking with black beans in their dishes, but for me nothing was tastier than the picanha, which is a barbecued meat, and I was also rather partial to a feijoada, which is a hearty pork stew with black beans. One day Anka and I decided to go camping in a large wooded area of natural forest that consisted of luxurious vegetation along with myrtle, laurel, palm, acacia, rosewood, Brazil nut, rubber and Amazonian mahogany trees. After walking for a long while, we encountered a couple of sloths, and they were just so beautiful to watch, and they were hanging upside down and looking at us rather curiously, and it seemed that they were undaunted and unfazed by our appearance. We also encountered the most amazing birds, from the toucans to the parrots and macaws and hummingbirds, and as I've always loved birds, I was completely overwhelmed to observe such colourful birds. They were spectacular. I remember we were hot and sweaty, and we were being bitten alive by mosquitoes and other carnivorous-looking insects that seemed all too eager to eat us alive. Sadly, Anka had completely forgotten to bring any insect repellent with us, something that you should never do in the Brazilian forest. Some parts of the woods were so overgrown that we had to literally use a machete to cut our way through the forest, I kid you not. It was not long before Anka and I found a place to camp for the night, in a large open clearing beside a gushing pebbly stream that meandered and spiralled through the whole valley. It was very enchanting, magical and terribly pretty, and we got the fire going to do our best to try and smoke out those obnoxious eating insects. It really was a sublime, enchanting evening, and the magical sounds of the forest were alive with the sounds of crickets and frogs, and there were other more intimidating roars and howls to be heard from animals that were clearly predators of some kind. Anka and I were feeling so much better as the smoke from our fire pit was successful in warding off those flesh-eating nasty bugs, and it was somewhat of a protection against predators, giving us a secure feeling of safety. There's nothing like a good fire to do that for you. We had set up a large tent in the open clearing, and we sat by our fire pit, talking and enjoying plastic glasses of cheap boxed red wine. It was such a bright, magical, cheerful night, with a golden white glaze from the full moon and silver sparkle from the twinkling stars, although there was a large canopy above us, that the light of the moon danced through the branches and lit up the entire clearing, quite brightly, I might add. Not to mention the light of the oil lamp, which also enabled us to view our map and discuss whereabouts we were to travel in the morning, because it is easy to get so lost in these forests, and so we needed to make absolutely sure we charted a reliable course for ourselves. I was lucky because Anka had a great deal of hiking experience behind her, as her father had once been a forest tour guide, so I knew I was in exceedingly safe hands with Anka's vast, invaluable knowledge of the Brazilian forest. Suddenly, before we knew it, we were surrounded, just from nowhere, by hundreds of monkeys that were eagerly rifling through our belongings to see if they could find any edibles. All our stuff was being flung all over the place. One of the monkeys opened our fruit bag and proceeded to eat a banana with great gusto, looking at us as if it was no big deal, while the other monkeys tried to tear the fruit bag away from him. But the naughty little critter held on to it for dear life and had absolutely no intention of sharing with anyone. Not in your life. He had an animated expression on his face, as if he'd most certainly won the food diving lottery. "Where on earth did they come from?" I asked Anka. "I think they've been watching us for quite some time," she said. "They're amazing at remaining invisible. We were trying to stop the monkeys from going through my backpack that was filled with all our food supplies for the next couple of days, but they weren't fearful of us at all, which was exceedingly frustrating. I tried to shoo them away, but with very little effect. Suddenly we heard the most terrifying roar that was so petrifying that it actually caused the ground to vibrate and shudder beneath us. We could literally feel the ground move. We heard these heavy bipedal feet thundering towards our campsite, and as they sprinted towards us, we could hear tree limbs breaking and tree branches crunching. It truly sounded like a trampeding elephant in musk was charging at us and rampaging through the undergrowth like a heavy bulldozer on full throttle. In terror, the monkeys just scattered, and I noticed that they seemed all too familiar with that sound, as if they knew what was charging us, and they had no intention of hanging around whatsoever. Suddenly standing yards away from us was this apex predator. I don't know how else to describe him to you. He was a monstrous giant, such as the likes that I have never ever seen before. The creature was literally titanic in its vast mammoth proportions, and was easily 9 foot tall, 900 pounds, and 4 feet wide. The first instinctive impression I procured from this creature was that it was a human giant, literally covered in dense, thick black hair, with the exception, of course, of the long grey face that was hairless and had a leathery but human-like appearance to it. This colossal creature was built like an army tank. It was burly, thick and muscular, and its overlong arms and human-like hands and feet were remarkably like humans, but so much larger. The creature barely acknowledged us, as his focus was on our large rucksacks. The critter pounded his chest a few times with his massive fists, and let out a thunderous roar, which I believed was designed to intimidate the monkeys that we had just seen, including the other forest animals, to affirm his high-ranking position, as I imagine king of the forest, which he most certainly was. We watched in absolute horror, and in awe at the same time, if that's possible, as this colossal critter glided towards our backpacks, rifling through them with jubilant enthusiasm, like a kid emptying out a Christmas stocking. He looked exactly like that. The critter tossed the things that were of no interest to him at all over his shoulders, like plastic plates and cutlery that went flying haphazardly into the air. Along went a book with him, a hairbrush, camera, binoculars, and they were literally scattered liberally all over our campsite. It was a massive mess. Finally, the creature came to our delicious food parcels, and he placed all the things he wanted in a very neat particular pile that included raw bacon pieces, cashew nuts, potato chips, a big block of sweaty cheddar cheese, biscuits, beef jerky, grapes, and plenty of dried fruit. He opened the box of red wine, took a sip, and spat it out in absolute disgust and revulsion, pouring it across the clearing, with all the contents sadly spilling out. Gone was all our delicious red wine. He then examined all the inedible items to see if anything was interesting enough for him to take, and nothing held the remotest appeal to him, I'm glad to say, so he discarded everything, including our freeze-dried food, which he tossed on the forest floor. He proceeded to pile our fresh food into my rucksack, and then he threw the rucksack over his gargantuan back, and this large rucksack, I kid you not, looked just like a handbag on his shoulders. It looked so small. It was in that moment that he looked up and gave a warning growl to us, much like a Rottweiler dog that guards his food. It was like he was saying, "This stuff is all mine. Don't even dream of challenging me." And then the creature just thundered away through the forest, barely giving us a second glance. But, boy, did he leave behind a lot of shock. All the while Anchor and I had watched this creature, we were beginning to believe we were seeing things like the effect you might get from a psychedelic drug. I say that because until you've seen this creature up close and personal for yourself, you will only then comprehend how incongruous it seems in our natural reality. It really seemed so out of place, and yet it was larger than life, and real it most certainly was. We did not just see what I think we saw, I asked Anchor, who was shaking like a leaf, and her eyes had grown as wide as saucers. "So it's true," she said, looking absolutely dazed. "My father told me about the coal-black giant in the forest when he went on hiking trails, but I just thought he was trying to scare us. I had absolutely no idea it was true." "Your father told you about this critter?" I asked in horror. "Oh, yes," she said. "Believe me, I've got some stories to tell you that would make your hair curl. I just thought they were all spurious, but now I think they were true. I truly thought it was all fictitious stuff. But now I've seen the creature for myself, I'm in no doubt that he's real." As you can imagine, after meeting the coal-black giant in the woods like we did, my nerves were most definitely frazzled, as I have never been so frightened in all my life, and so I literally begged and pleaded Anchor to let us leave the campsite the following morning, as that coal-black creature scared the living daylights out of me, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Looking back all these years later, I do realise we encountered a Bigfoot, which I am certain is equally as abundant in Brazil as in North America, only the locals are less inclined to talk about it, largely due to superstitious reasons. I'm still very good friends with Anchor, and speak to her regularly, and so I'm sure she will send you some interesting Bigfoot encounters from people who have encountered the beast themselves, and I'm sure your listeners will be very entertained. All these years later, that event is the most profound in my entire life, so I hope your listeners enjoyed my story.
Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, I'm attending to my front yard dutifully, pulling weeds that have thrust their ugly, spiky, pugnacious heads through the granular white stones that border either side of my red brick driveway, fringing the edges of my perennial flower beds that contain a kaleidoscope of summer flowers to roses that are tangled together in an English country cottage style, where dusky blue showy spikes fold in with ethereal delicate blooms in purples, pinks and reds, in reference to some of those ghastly monstrosities we choose to call weeds, that know no beauty, that have firmly decided to contentiously dapple my turf, or thrust themselves through my flower beds like unwelcome gatecrashers at a party, gracing my yard with their unsightly appearance and vigorous, indomitable resolve that even the bouncers of the plant world cannot eliminate without a touch of human intervention, as weeds like this are the most tenacious among the plants and the most grotesquely ugly in my opinion. I work studiously hard with my hands, ploughing the turf efficiently, to pull out these unprepossessing repellent buggers, some with roots that run so deep. I sigh warily at the tireless battle ahead of me. The gardener I'd hired to help me with the yard work once a week, whom always plays the music so loud from his truck, as if he's entertaining a cricket stadium while he works, has clearly overlooked the job of doing the weeds, as if somehow they're not his responsibility. This staunchly strenuous job is certainly not for the faint-hearted, as I have World War III on my hands with these weeds. I wipe away the sweat that has dappled itself on my forehead with the back of my hand. My head is covered with a large flopping sun hat. The knees of my jeans have become as black as the earth itself, and if you didn't know better, you would have thought I'd been dragged through the mud backwards. I glance at the cottage with a reverential awe, hardly daring to believe that it's all mine. It seems almost incomprehensible. I mean, I'm 24 years old, for goodness sake, with a plethora of student loans that have piled up and need paying off. At the very least, with my wages, combined with that of my fiancé's, we could have afforded to rent a somewhat decent apartment together. But to buy a cottage like this, not a chance. Who would have thought that a summer job, helping an old woman with some menial chores around the cottage, joining her for frequent cups of tea and cosy chats, as well as cooking her some meals, would have ultimately led to her leaving this cottage all to me? Mona Sandilands was such a sweet, dear, endearing old lady. My family had known her in passing over many long years. She had regularly attended the local church in town, and was well known for the vast collection of novel, colourful hats she wore every Sunday, that looked like collector's pieces, they were so marvellously unique. She came from a generation that believed you dressed up in your Sunday best for church. I thoroughly enjoyed spending time with Mona Sandilands. It had never ever been a laborious chore, but a complete pleasure. I enjoyed the conversations I had with older people. They always had something interesting to say. There's something about the older generation I truly appreciate. Many of them are so comfortable in their skin. They know who they are. When you're my age, you're still struggling to find yourself. You care about what other people think about you. But as you get older, you let those former preoccupations and insecurities you may have had about yourself during your youth just fly away like a dandelion seed being blown on the wind. I don't think Mrs. Sandilands had any family, but I never expected to inherit this incredible cottage from her, that I gather is over 300 years old. So it's got oodles of character that you could never ever find in a modern home. I often think that little like a fine wine that mellows and improves with age, as it marinates in the juices of the grape. It's no difference with a home, as over time the history of the home becomes like an indulgent, fragrant bouquet. And it's almost as if the house settles, develops roots all of its own, like a large oak tree, becomes more and more magnificent with time, and blends in so seamlessly with the natural fauna and flora. I'd always told Mrs. Sandilands that her cottage was like a beautiful poem. I'm just so grateful that Mona died so peacefully in her sleep one night. She always told me that this was the way she ultimately wanted to go. She wanted to die here at Tumbledown Cottage. She had clandestinely put the cottage into my name, with the help of my father, insisting I was not to know about her generous gift until after her death. So my dad was privy to her great kindness. She told him that young people had it so hard these days, and with my student loans I deserved to have a helping hand. I loved the cottage, and she would be delighted to pass it on to someone who appreciated it as much as she had done in life. I know one of Mona's favourite spots was the pretty backyard, overlooking prepossessing views of the woods that contain a vast congenial collection of trees that pencil up majestically into the large cobalt blue sky, from white pines to hackberries and red and bur oak trees. Mona Sandilands' cottage was down the road from our farmhouse, was situated in half an acre of land. The story goes that Mona's grandfather, Sidney Pascal, whom had been one of the few farmhands on the very large corn farm, had noticed what looked like a doll's dress floating upside down in the silvery pond, entangled in some water lilies. By all accounts, he could easily have overlooked, disregarded the strange sight with a measure of indifference, and dismissed it out of hand as just a piece of cloth blown away by the wind that was now submerged in the water. But he spontaneously dashed into the water to investigate this incongruous curiosity, as he had an overwhelming sense, an instinctive feeling that something was seriously off. He was to discover it was the farmer's 7-year-old daughter Gracie, who had fallen into the water, becoming entangled and ensnared by the water lilies. He had pulled the little girl from the pond, like a drowned rat. Little Gracie's ashen, dishevelled, doll-like body seemed vacant of any life. She was motionless, her body limp and lifeless. Mona's grandfather did not give up on the little child, but vigorously performed chest compressions on her, eliminating the water from her lungs. She began to choke, spewing out water from her throat, coughing, spluttering, hungrily gasping for air. Once she was revived, the first words that came out of her mouth were, "Where's my dolly?" I gather the little girl, Gracie, decided to take her dolly for a swim in the lake, but her doll fell into the water and floated away. Gracie tried to retrieve it, and vicariously fell into the water herself, becoming entangled by all the lilies. The farmer felt so indebted to Mona's grandfather for saving his little daughter's precious life, and asked him what he could give him as a way of saying thank you. Mona's grandfather said he would like the cottage at the rear of the property, overlooking the white sandy road. The farmer cordoned off what he considered to be a small piece of land, given the vast size of his farm, containing it neatly within the borders of a smart white picket fence, and Mona's grandfather called his new home Tumbledown Cottage. I gather the name of the cottage came about from the little girl tumbling down into the water. Tumbledown Cottage is situated in a countrified location geographically, close to the city of Medina, a rural city in Hennepin County, a suburb in Minneapolis, Minnesota, in an area rich in farmlands, woodlands and lakes. It's situated in the upper Midwest, in interior North America, sharing a water border of Lake Superior with Michigan and Wisconsin. The town itself has a sparse suburban feel, with coffee shops and parks, and a relatively small population. I will almost certainly never forget the indelible day I discovered that Mona Sandilands had died overnight, at the grand old age of 99 years old, which was not a bad innings, although she had hoped to make it to 100, as that was a milestone she would have very much liked to have accomplished or conquered, rather like running a marathon or climbing Mount Everest, but regretfully it was not to be. But the very good news was that until the day she died, she was living a fully independent life, and that was something she never ever took for granted. I will admit her old weathered hands, mottled by liver spots, blue veins and wrinkles, looked more like claws. They were gnarled with an angry, obnoxious arthritis. Her once very straight back, elegant gait, vertical deportment, had certainly suffered from the cruel ravages of time, curling, folding, and flopping over her torso, like the sweeping boughs of a weeping willow, skimming the surfaces of the water so gracefully. Her body had become slower, cumbersome, less agile, so that her walking was slow, deliberate, and very considered. But other than that, she was in remarkably good nick, for one so advanced in years. She had always been a spindly woman, with matchstick-like legs and arms. Her long, silky hair, as white as the walls of the cottage itself, always smelt so fragrantly fresh of apple shampoo, and was swept back elegantly from her small weather-beaten face in a neat chignon. She had brown, lively eyes like a squirrel, that were the colour of rich dark chocolate, always sparkling with a curious inquisitive merriment, but her face became so wrinkled and furrowed by lines that sometimes she rather reminded me of a wizened old tortoise. But for me, that made her all the more endearing, all the more charming, for here was a woman who had truly lived her life to the fullest, and her life was written so eloquently in the lines of her face and within the sparkles of her eyes. I remember that day with a crystal-clear clarity, as if looking through a pane of glass, reliving it all over again. I had been riding my bicycle from our red-bricked farmhouse, we called the Golden Hob, sailing down the sweeping white dusty country lane, in rather an inappropriate flowery cotton dress that was blowing in the wind like a large sail. Not exactly the most desirable thing to be wearing on a bicycle, I hasten to say. I remember when I arrived at Tumbledown Cottage, I parked my bicycle against the garage door, ambling over the red brick driveway to the gleaming front door that was painted in lilac to complement the purple wisteria. I pulled the key up from underneath the broken terracotta flower pot, where hanging geraniums cascaded over its lip in a cocktail of pretty red blooms. On that enchanting morning, everything was indelibly tattooed in my memory, so that it couldn't be stolen from me, not even by the hands of time itself. Everything looked perfectly beautiful, so tranquil, so serene, so undisturbed and unspoilt. Despite the whipping wind that blew across the valley, punnelling the corn crop from the farmer's field beyond, so that the pretty ears of corn bobbed against its teasing nudges, there was a pronounced lightness in the air that morning. The sunshine seemed to dapple the white brick walls of the house with pretty speckles of light, while the dusky feather boa blooms of the lilac wisteria tumbled delicately over the walls in sweeping showers. I plunged the key into the lock, opening the door, to find several letters left by the postman still lying on the ground. That was my first inkling that something was terribly wrong. The house seemed steeped in a subdued, very quiet silence, marinated in a restrained, unobtrusive mood. I called out, "Mrs. Sandilands! Mona! Mona!" But there was no response. I immediately ran to her bedroom. She was lying there on her bed, still in her clothes she'd been wearing the previous day, as if she'd slipped off to bed for a brief catnap. Her glasses were still on her face, and an Agatha Christie novel lay by her side. She looked so peaceful, almost as if she was fast asleep. I removed her glasses, covered her body with purple wisteria blooms and red geraniums, as if she was lying in a bed of flowers, and I sat down beside her bed to read her a story, even though I knew she was gone. In a strange way I felt she was there with me. My tears were laced with joy and sadness at the same time. Joy that she had died in Tumbledown Cottage in her sleep, sadness that she had left her earthly shell, and I wouldn't be seeing her again. But I knew that I would always feel her warm presence in this home. I knew her energy lay within the very foundations of this cottage. She used to tell me she'd often feel her grandfather's presence in this place. I don't doubt for a moment that that was true. As I dig up the weeds in the front yard, it's almost like Mona Sandilands is here with me, smiling down on me, wearing a huge floppy white sun hat, decorated with pink roses. It's as if she's giving me an approving grin, saying, "You go, girl." She hated and despised weeds with a vengeance, and was flauntingly proud of her yard, where the white wicker fence overlooked cornfields, billowing hills in the furthest distance, and was fringed by a majestic wood grove of trees. She would be so pleased with what I'm doing now, keeping these nasty buggers at bay. Me and my fiancé moved into Tumbledown Cottage 2 weeks after Mona's fortuitous death, as the cottage was effectively mine, the deeds in my name. I didn't have to wait for all the contentious issues an imprisoning red tape that always perpetually arise when attorneys deal with estates, which is what Mrs. Sandilands wanted me to have to avoid. A very clever move on her part. All of a sudden I hear deep guttural yells coming from the backyard, where a mechanical digger is being used to bring up the earth. I'm having my kitchen extended, courtesy of my father, who wanted to pay for the work as a gift for me. The nagging mechanical sound it was making has suddenly stopped. My heart thunders in my chest, my stomach heaves, while sweat between my shoulder blades is now dribbling down my back. Has something happened? Is one of the builders injured? Oh my God, one of the builders is injured! My mind dances from one gruesome possibility to the next, rather like a frog jumping from one water lily to another on a silvery pond. In my mind's eye, my imagination spares me no mercy, no tactful consideration. I see it all so gruesomely graphically in my mind's eye. Severed joints, gushing blood, amputated limbs. For a moment, time stands horribly still, as a congealing claustrophobic energy hems me in so tightly, stealing my breath, constraining my ability to even react. I freeze to the spot. The yelling has stopped for a moment. The ominous feeling I have is in direct opposition to everything else on this congenial day, that gives no hint that it could suddenly become shrouded in an unsavoury darkness, an unpalatable experience. The blue sky is like a calm ocean, without a cloud in sight. The sunlight twinkles generously through her ethereal canopy, with a temperature that is pleasing, not too hot nor too cold. That's when I see the builder Matty running around the side of the property. He's looking for me. My heart sinks like a rock, plunging to the bottom of a very large lake. I know what he's going to tell me. I know exactly what he wants to tell me, and I don't want to hear it. I want to be out of here. I don't want to be around. Call the emergency services. There's been a dreadful accident. Blood everywhere. I can just imagine it. Matty is roughly about my age, a rather handsome fellow. His T-shirt is drenched in sweat under the armpits. His wavy Nordic curls seem to resiliently bob up and down in the air as he moves towards me. His blue eyes look panicky, like the waves of a tempestuous, turbulent ocean. But within the panic, I sense the rising effervescent bubbles of an untamed, unbridled excitement. It seems like rather a strange mix to me. Has there been an accident? I ask, thinking that he's going to ask me to call an ambulance. Carlotta, he says, his words spilling out of his mouth so fast that he sounds more like a jetting waterfall. I can't hear a word of what he's saying. Sorry to disturb you, but I need to show you something right now. Please come quickly. I put down my trowel, wipe my dirty hands against my knees, follow him around the backyard. What could it be, I wonder? As those yells I'd heard earlier were not of the joyful kind. I'm not very good at dealing with the builders. I prefer to leave that to my fiancé Marvin and the architect Mr. Markham. I don't want to be dragged into something like this. But with my fiancé at work, I really have no option but to be dragged towards this problem. A problem I would so much sooner avoid. It's when I reach the backyard, I see the other builder, Bertie, bending down in the soil. He's using his hand to whisk away some of the soil. Oh my God, he's discovered a skeleton. That's all I need to put a halt to this building project. Somebody's been clandestinely buried under the yard of my home. I think of all the dreadful possibilities. A previous resident, before the house actually came into Mona's family's hands, perhaps. Accidentally beat his wife over on the head after a spat, and now she's buried in the yard. Oh, please no, it can't be that. Is it a body? I ask. A human body? No, not a human body, ma'am. This is a body of a Bigfoot. Bloody hell, this is quite some awesome find. It proves these things are real. What should we do with the body, ma'am? We've got to move it. Are you sure about this, I say, peering into the soil curiously, seized by a huge sense of relief that this is not a human corpse that we're dealing with, but a Bigfoot skeleton seems more than a little unlikely. I'm sure the builders have got it wrong. It has to be a bear. As if sensing my doubt, Matty rolls the body over for me to take a better look at it. Let's just say I almost pass out in astonishment. My heart thunders in my chest so violently I can hear every single vibration. I'm bewildered by how intact the body is. It can't have been dead for very long. When I say that, it's been dead for a couple of months, maybe a little bit more or less. The smell is repugnant, the odour vile and offensive, so much so that me and the builders are covering our noses with revulsion, while a few flies, attracted to the smell, rudely gatecrash our discovery, buzzing frenziedly over the corpse, eager to lay their eggs in the decomposing flesh. "It's huge," says Bertie. "Easily 8 foot tall, 700 pounds. Look at the size of these feet. They're gargantuan. What do you want to do, ma'am, with the body?" "Well, I don't want to draw attention to it, do I? I think you should rebury it over there under the oak tree. If you don't mind," I say, pointing to a few large trees that frame the edges of my yard. "I would appreciate it if you didn't tell anybody about this. It's very important. The Bigfoot deserves to rest in peace, not to be prodded by well-meaning people. I'd rather you mention this to no one, not to the architect, nor to my fiancé. Let it be our little secret. I just don't think we should draw attention to this. I'd like you to bury the creature now as quickly as possible, if you don't mind. I'm going to pass out from the smell. It's obnoxious, and these flies buzzing around, they're driving me crazy, and it's only going to get worse."
"Couldn't have put it better myself, ma'am. I think the less people know about this, the better. You know what kind of commentary this discovery could easily invite. It could impede our building project. And frankly, as you say, it's kind to let the Bigfoot rest in peace. I think it must have died of natural causes. I see no sign of a bullet wound anywhere. Maybe the creature was old. Maybe he died of a heart attack or something. But why he was buried so close to your property, I honestly don't know that. And it was recent, too. It's very, very strange."
I knew that I could trust Bert and his brother Matty to keep this secret between us. The two brothers were like two peas in a pod, with those Nordic, long, lean, blonde looks, but they were very reticent. My family had known them for many years, and they were not big talkers. I hoped I could trust them to maintain their discretion, but there was always a fleeting possibility they just might talk. After all, it's not every day you stumble across a relatively fresh Bigfoot corpse in your own backyard. You may wonder why I didn't want to tell anyone about this, especially my fiancé. About discovering a Bigfoot corpse buried in my backyard, I mean. In truth, I can't answer that question for you fully. Of course, I didn't want my building project stalled or postponed, but I was also trying to get my head around the fact that this outlandish, idiosyncratic creature of fiction actually existed in our reality. My fiancé and I had got the wheels in motion to get this building project started, and both Matty and Bert were committed to another building project commencing in a month's time. If they didn't complete our project in time, we would be left with a half-finished kitchen, for goodness knows how long. If you've ever lived around building and all those noises, you'll understand that it's a complete nightmare, and it was something I certainly wanted to avoid. When my fiancé returned home that evening from work, he announced that I seemed peculiarly quiet, as if I was lost in thought. But I wrestled to tell him about the Bigfoot, and decided better against it. Instead, I just boiled pasta on the hob, and cooked dinner for the two of us, my mind thousands of miles away. Let's just say the builders that day had discreetly buried him under the oak tree, and because the creature had such a human face, I decided to place some flowers over the gravesite and say a couple of prayers for the creature. It seemed like the right thing to do, and brought me a great measure of peace. I did wonder in moments of soulful reflection why the Bigfoot was buried in the backyard, so close to our kitchen. It had clearly died recently, when Mona Sandilands was still alive. If these creatures bury their own, why had it been buried so close to Tumbledown Cottage, and not out there in the woodgrove, or in the farmer's field? I do not recall Mrs. Sandilands ever saying to me that there were Bigfoots on her land. I did ask her once if she was afraid to live on her own in the cottage in her advancing years, where her frailty made her so much more vulnerable. She did say something rather strange once. "The good Lord has sent his angels to take care of me. Why would I worry if I'm being protected?" It did make me wonder if there were Bigfoots out there that kept a protective eye on her, sensing her vulnerability. It didn't seem beyond the bounds of implausibility. That night I slip in between the crisp cotton sheets of my double bed. I switch off the Tiffany bedside light and fall asleep. My fiancé's been up watching something on Netflix in the living room. I heard him climbing into the bed beside me, but I barely acknowledge him. He kisses me on the cheek and says, "Good night, sweetheart." I mumble a limp response as I'm beckoned down the path of sleepiness. I don't want to pull myself out of this satisfying groggy state. The exhaustion of the day had drawn up surprises rather like a rabbit emerging from a magician's hat. Fatigue had overtaken me like a wilting flower in a vase. I almost certainly needed my batteries recharged. I'm not sure why, but I woke up during the night with a start. My eyes instinctively bounced to the bright red digital bedside clock by my bedside table. It's 1:30 in the morning. Our black and white tabby cat, Whisper, is lying beside my fiancé. He's also locked in a deep sleep, but his ears suddenly perk up as I sit up in bed awkwardly, his dark eyes studying me curiously. I don't know what it is about my fiancé Marvin, but let's just say animals naturally gravitate towards him. Whisper was my cat in the very beginning, I hasten to say, but he's taken such a shine to my fiancé. So let's just say these days I don't get much of a look in with that cat. I will admit I'm a tad jealous about this fact. My ears stand up in attention. There it goes again. Another curious banging sound. It sounds rather like a branch of a tree bumping against the eaves of a house. "Did you hear that?" I say, poking Marvin on the shoulder. But his body curls up. He mumbles something under his breath that sounds like, "It's nothing. Get back to sleep. Don't worry yourself about a thing." I knew he was right. Old houses are notoriously noisy. They make strange sounds because they've been around for a long time. It could also be the wind that was making this noise, but it was somehow worth investigating. I climbed out of bed, my feet retching, spontaneously curling up, as they touched the ice-cold oakwood floorboards. Even though it's summer, this house with its thick walls can be very cold at night. I put on my slippers and trundled down the staircase, with its long ribbon of Persian carpet that glides graciously down the steps. In a fetching sweep, there's a pulling, gnawing and jerking feeling in my guts, alerting me to the fact that something is definitely up. I trudge into the kitchen, without daring to switch on the main light, as that would draw attention to me and make me very conspicuous. I stand against the countertops very still for a moment, my focus pinned on the backyard, as I astutely stare out of the kitchen window. I can see the robust, formidable silhouette of the mechanical digger in the foreground, along with piles and piles and piles of upturned earth. And then in the furthest distance, the outside light of my kitchen, that overlooks the backyard, appears to have generously flooded everything with an effusive light. My eyes are drawn to the dark solitary form, that from the kitchen looks like a sturdy tree trunk, minus its leafy paraphernalia. Then I notice the tree trunk is swaying from side to side, and that is when I realise that this is no tree trunk at all. But what is it? I discern a dark, vertical, hazy silhouette. It appears to be bending over the gravesite, under the large oak tree. And the first thought that comes into my mind is, could this be a Bigfoot? Maybe he or she knows their friend has been reburied, and that would be quite distressing for the creature to appreciate or even understand. I grab my husband's rifle, not because I want to harm the Bigfoot, if it is a Bigfoot at all, but just to ensure that I'm safe. I know if I was to wake my fiancé and tell him about this idiosyncratic creature loitering around our backyard at night, he would never dream of letting me go outside. I am reminded of the dead Bigfoot that I'd seen lying in the ground, with a face so human. It seems hard to believe that something of such human proportions, only massive in size, could be that different to us. I remember hearing a story about how these horses in Africa invited a wild zebra to join the herd. They recognized the commonality between each other. Although they belong to the equidae family, they are very different. They do say that unlike horses, zebras don't really like other animals. But this particular zebra emphatically believed he was a horse, and he acted as one too. It would seem she gave birth to horses with stripes. I was sure that the Bigfoot would not harm me if he saw me, as surely he would recognize the commonality between the two of us, that those horses in Africa had recognized in the zebra. I was feeling a little flustered with excitement, sprinkled with a measure of curiosity. I had to see this creature. I had to see what he was up to. I quickly opened the kitchen door very quietly, stealthily creeping across the ground, rifle in hand. I moved towards the trees that fringe the right-hand corner of our yard. I know that the imposing beech tree, close to the oak, will give me a great view of the creature. I moved cautiously, very silently through the trees, passing the large eyesore in the middle of our lawn, caused by the mechanical digger. A gentle wind is blowing. It's causing the trees to rustle. I move in accordance to the sound of the wind, hoping that its light blustering whipping sounds will clandestinely camouflage and mask the very sound of my own feet. My foot presses down on the ground, caressing the green turf, very gently. I finally reach my destination, the large beech tree that is feet away from the oak. I reach out to hold the trunk, to stabilize my body, to steady myself. My little inquisitive head peers out at the Bigfoot, whom is energetically digging up the gravesite with an impassioned obstinance. She resolutely whisks up the soil, much like a dog with its paws, but she ploughs assiduously through the ground with a speedy efficiency, a tenacious, unflagging determination, using her powerful hands and sausage-sized fingers, rather like a pliable trowel. She is powerful, brawny, burly, built like a mechanical digger herself, sturdy, robust, sinewy, tough and strong, with long, flowing dark hair that curtains her entire body, like a generous, sumptuous, thick rug. She looks very similar to the creature we discovered earlier on in the day, with a feminine face that is remarkably human. I know she's female. I can't miss her large breasts that hang down across her torso like two pears. The first thought that crosses my mind: how could this creature know her friend was reburied here? Could it be because the builders had disturbed the original gravesite? Is this her friend? Or could it be a brother or a partner? I watch as the creature unearths the body of the Bigfoot. Their air is once again offended by the vile, hostile odour. The female Bigfoot is audibly gasping, as if she can't comprehend what she's seeing. She runs her hand over the deceased corpse, as if the creature's only just died. She is grievously upset, as if she's only finally discovered that her loved one is dead. She is not behaving like someone whom is reconciled to a death, but more like someone who's only exhumed this sobering truth and is soaking in the dreadful reality of what this unwelcome disclosure has finally revealed. I can hear her making these whimpering, clawing sounds at the back of her throat, that sounds like she's moaning in pain, like a dog whining in its distress. She's cradling the limp dead body of the deceased Bigfoot, as if it's a beloved friend or partner, in her overlong arms, rocking him back and forth. The smell of death and decay is abhorrently repellent. I almost want to throw up, it's so disgusting. But I cover my mouth and my nose with my nightshirt. My heart is grieving so much for her. I want to go over to her and comfort her, but I just can't do it. I'm not quite sure how I will be received, but I know she's grievously upset. I can sense her desolation, her loneliness, her despair. The creature slides the Bigfoot's body out of the soil, covers the ground, placing everything back exactly as it was before. So the ground looks untrampled, undisturbed, untouched. She rises up to a standing position and pads the ground down with her feet firmly. Then she folds her torso over her knees and, using her overlong arms, crumbles the soil in her hands. And then finally, with a sweeping caress, she artfully throws some leafy foliage over the burial spot. She then throws the deceased Bigfoot over her back, like an oversized sack of potatoes, and saunters off into the field of corn, until her body is all but a speck in the distance. She finally disappears into the trees. For a moment, I stand very still, just listening to the sounds of the night, the chirp of the crickets, the croaks of frogs, the distant howls from coyotes. A soft gusty wind whips, punnels, jabs undelicately against my clothes, but still I don't move. I discover that my eyes are actually wet. I realize I've been crying for the grieving Bigfoot, whose emotional outburst and painful cries I had personally witnessed under the oak tree. They had moved me to the core. She had moved me to the core. I knew that somewhere in that wood grove, a grave was being dug for the Bigfoot's beloved. My heart just went out to her. The next morning after my fiancé had left for work, I woke with a start to hear a hammering at the front door. I audibly groaned. It's obviously the bloody builders. What do they want now? Do they really need to be mollycoddled all over again? Have they not heard of using their initiative? I had overslept after my rather busy night of curiosity that could easily have killed the cat if I wasn't careful. For a moment the previous night's events echo in my head, but the rapping at the door continues, so I climb out of bed, throwing on my dressing gown, glancing at myself briefly in the mirror. I do a double take. I can't believe it's actually me staring back at me. My hair looks like a wasp's nest. It's in such disarray, is a tangled, messy chaos, while my eyes look as if they're surrounded by dark circles. I dash hurriedly down the staircase to the front door. To my amazement, I see Bert and Matty standing at the door with a couple of young men whom I don't even know. "Sorry to wake you up, man. Sorry for our rudeness. But last night we went to a bar. Had a little bit too much to drink. I think we were very excited about what we'd discovered earlier on in the day yesterday. Well, we got talking. We let slip about the Bigfoot we discovered. We won't tell anyone else about this, ma'am. We promise you that. But these two friends of ours, Bob and Joey, simply refuse to believe our story. They say Bigfoots are not real. We're making it all up. So I do hope you don't mind dreadfully if we dig up the gravesite to prove to them that we did see this creature and that they do exist. They'll be able to see its flesh and blood. I showed them my cell phone footage, but they say it's just a hoax. I want to show them for myself that it's real. It won't take a minute, ma'am. I promise we won't tell anyone else, and we will rebury the creature and never ever bother you again." I feel heartily annoyed that the two men I'd trusted to maintain their discretion had betrayed my trust. Even these two reticent characters, after a touch of alcohol, had spilled out our secret. I then remember the Bigfoot's deceased body has been spirited away. So I say, "Go ahead, but be quick about it." "Thank you, ma'am. We're very, very grateful," they say to me. They quickly dash over to the oak tree. They begin to frantically dig up the ground. This I have to see. I change quickly into my jeans and sweatshirt and dash down to watch the proceedings. I just can't wait to see both Bert and Matty's expressions when they discover the Bigfoot corpse is no longer there. I wonder what they'll make of it. The two men are talking excitedly to each other. "This I have to see," says Bob, "with my own eyes, because I'm sorry, bro, but that cell phone footage looks like a complete hoax to me. It didn't fool me for a moment." "Just you wait and see," says Matty proudly. "You'll be eating your words, I promise you this. This thing is real. It's humongous. And remember, you owe me a big steak for this." I watch with amusement, trying to suppress my giggles, as both Matty and Bert dig and dig aimlessly. They look at each other nonplussed. "I promise you, I'm not lying. It was here. We buried it ourselves yesterday. It was definitely here. It was as real as you and me. And you could see it clearly. It was definitely a Bigfoot. But it's gone. It's just vanished." "Right," said Bob. "You're pathetic, Matty. This is a warp joke that's gone way too far. What were you doing? Going to show us an old Bigfoot costume or something? I told you it was a bunch of baloney." "Tell him, ma'am. Tell him there really was a Bigfoot here, and that we're not making any of this up." I'm saying nothing, I say, walking away. It must have been a month later, after our kitchen had been completed, that I was looking through Mona's old cookery books. I found a book of old southern recipes, of things you can do with the versatility of minced beef. And then something falls onto the ground. It's a drawing of a Bigfoot. I read the back. It reads, "Godji, Black Raven, July 2010. This picture was a hand-drawn picture and looked exactly like the Bigfoot the builders had found lying in the grave. I knew Mona could draw very well. I recognised her writing. Was Godji her friend? Was that why he was buried by the house? But who had buried him? And why had he died? Little did I know that my answers to this curious conundrum would soon be answered, sooner than I expected. That was when we invited Mona's oldest friend to our home for dinner, after the alterations were complete. Morris lived with his family on their farm. He was about 80 years old. He had been married to Mona's sister, whom had died 8 years prior. But Mona and Morris had remained very close friends, and he was always helping Mona out when she needed a bulb changing or the lawn mown.
It's good of you to extend such a generous courtesy by inviting me here for dinner tonight,
says Morris, his beady dark eyes running over our home, rather like a hungry Hoover. I could tell he was exceedingly interested in what we'd done to Mona's cottage.
I must say I'm remarkably impressed. You've transformed the cottage. It looks quite wonderful. Mona was determined to leave this cottage to you. She said you identified with the bones of this place, and this cottage appears to have spoken to your heart. She felt you were meant to own it.
Wait until you see the kitchen, I say, ushering Morris into our extended airy kitchen. For a moment the elderly man just stands there, in what I describe as a steeped silence, as if his tongue is robbed of all its words. He stares vacantly at the kitchen, with a bemused, befuddled expression on his face, as if he doesn't know what to make of it all.
You excavated the land here. You dug everything up on the outside of the kitchen, to make it bigger, I see.
That's right, I say, looking heartily disappointed at Morris's complete lack of enthusiasm.
How did the excavation go? He asks in a nonchalant, indifferent way. No issues along the way?
Then it dawns on me. He's talking about the Bigfoot. Was he the one responsible for burying it? I had told my fiancé Marvin about the Bigfoot by this time, so I said to Morris, "You're talking about the Bigfoot." His face colours.
That's right. What did you do with his body? You didn't tell anyone about it, did you? Mona would have been most upset if you did.
To cut a long story short, it would seem that Morris didn't know about Mona's relationship with the Bigfoot until she called him up one day to ask him to bury her Bigfoot friend, that she called by a strange name, that I gather means Black Raven. She said he had always watched out for her, and often stood in the spot where he was buried, to watch over her cottage. So although Bert could not reveal many details, it seemed there was a Bigfoot in her life that kept a beady eye on her, until one day Mona found him outside the kitchen door dead. She thought he might have died of a heart attack. He tried to squirrel more information out of Mona, but all she could say was that Black Raven was her very best friend. Morris said that she was never the same after her friend had died. Morris believed that Black Raven's untimely death had almost certainly hastened her own. So there you are. That's my story. Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners. Victoria Swanepoel was known as Vicky, or Vix, by her friends, something which had displeased her mother immeasurably over the years, as she was insistent that her daughter was addressed by her full appropriate name. Mrs. Swanepoel didn't like the name Vicky, but try as she might to perpetually remind her daughter's friends that it wasn't Vicky, her name was Victoria. Indeed, poor Mrs. Swanepoel had corrected anyone who was listening, time and time again, from teachers to a pastor at the local church. But it hadn't worked. It had been like beating her head against a brick wall, as Victoria's friends unfailingly shortened her name to Vicky, and even worse, Vix. Let's just say her husband had warned her all those years ago, when they had named their daughter, soon after she was born, that her name would likely be shortened. Not on my watch, she had insisted. But eventually she'd given up. So in Victoria's life, the only people who ever called her by her original name were her parents, and now her current boyfriend, Robin, who Mrs. Swanepoel had fallen in love with almost immediately, when she heard him address her daughter by her full name, Victoria. "Robin, you're the only person who calls my daughter Victoria, aside from my husband and myself. May I ask you why?" To which he had responded with an impassioned eloquence.
"Your daughter, Mrs. Swanepoel, is a queen, just like Queen Victoria was. So her name should be spoken in full. It would be preposterous to shorten such a regal name. I'd never call her Vicky. That would certainly be an insult." From that moment on,
Mrs. Swanepoel, whose heart was not easily melted like butter over a hot steaming waffle, had decided that Victoria's boyfriend Robin was a real keeper, and she told her daughter as much. "I really like Robin," she told her daughter. "I don't want you to let this one get away. He's a real find." "Don't you worry," Victoria had laughed. "I have no intention of letting Robin get away. I know that even though I'm young, he's the one for me." It hadn't been easy to leave her home in Capitol Hill, Seattle, and move into a student digs, an apartment they were renting together. As being an only daughter, she was very attached to her parents, whom she considered her closest friends, but she knew she needed to gain a measure of independence, as she was so close to her 21st birthday, which was looming around the next corner. She didn't want to be accused of being tied to her parents' apron strings. That wasn't a cool, becoming look for a girl her age. Where had the time gone to, she wondered. It seemed like only the other day she was in first grade. Now she was sharing an apartment with 4 other students from the University of Puget Sound. She remembered a time when she considered her mother's age to be so old. But if time went by as fast as it invariably did, it wouldn't be long before she too would be celebrating her 40th birthday. She had even asked her grandmother once, "Granny, do you actually feel old?" Her grandmother had said, "No, absolutely not. Certainly not in here," she'd said, pointing to her heart. "But let's just say my body is not what it used to be. But that's where I feel my age. Not in my head, not in my heart. I feel exactly the same, only a lot more wiser." 2 of Victoria's very best friends were sharing the apartment with her, along with 2 other young students, Carmel and Jenny. It was fun living with a bunch of young students, and on this particular occasion they were all gathered together around a television, having ordered pizzas. There was a woman on the television from Washington State being interviewed. "I've lived here in Tacoma all my life. I'm telling you, I've seen those things. I promise you, they really do exist."
"How do you know, Miss Posey, that this is not a misidentification?" says the young man, holding the large intrusive appendage of the fluffy microphone head close to her mouth. The woman looks heartily annoyed with the interviewer. "I'm hardly going to say I saw something if I didn't, am I? I'm so sick and tired of all the scepticism out there these days, and the ridicule. Look, I'm telling you the absolute truth. I was returning home one night from the theatre with my son. Well, actually, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning. We both saw it together, basked in the full glowing light of my headlights. I distinctly saw the face. It had a pyramid-shaped head. It was very human-looking, very, very big. It had deep brown eyes that gave off an orange-gold eye shine." "What did it do, Mrs. Posey?"
The woman drew in a deep breath, as if she seriously wanted to throttle the interviewer and slap him across the face with a large frying pan. "What was he doing? He was in the road. He turned around and looked at us directly. We made eye contact."
"Do you think he was surprised to see you, Mrs. Posey?"
Mrs. Posey is again looking at the interviewer as if he must have misplaced his brains, as they don't appear to be in his head anymore. Perhaps they're in his wallet. "Of course he was surprised. I hardly think he was waiting in the road to make my personal acquaintance, do you?" she says churlishly. "These creatures are evasive, reticent, reserved and timorous, so no, I don't think he was actually hoping for an introduction with me."
"Were you scared at any point, Mrs. Posey?"
No, I wasn't scared. I was more shocked. The creature looked directly in my eyes. I could see the warmth in his eyes, a genuine kindness. We had a moment."
"A moment of what, Mrs. Posey?"
asks the interviewer. Mrs. Posey becomes a little belligerent, heated under the collar. "A connection. Look up the word in the dictionary if you don't know what it actually means. I told you he had kind eyes, a gentle benevolence, a profound emotional intelligence. A creature like that is not going to attack you unless he's provoked. Like a human being, it possessed sound reasoning."
"Do you think he was dangerous?"
Mrs. Posey looked offended. "Haven't you heard a single word I've just said? I told you he had kind eyes. He was emotionally intelligent. I hardly think under the circumstances that he was dangerous. Of course he could be if he was challenged, or someone pointed at him with the barrel of their gun. I don't doubt then that he would lose it and become aggressively reactive, and then, yes, you would be in grievous trouble. That creature could take your head off with one swipe of his hand. I don't doubt that, based on his Herculean size. But he wasn't exhibiting any aggression towards us, just bewilderment in seeing us at all. I don't think he was too delighted to have been seen. It was late at night, well, actually early in the morning. The road is usually devoid of traffic at that time. The wind was blowing heavily. I guess the tyres of my truck were not that discernible against the blustering conditions, so he was caught off guard. My car just encroached on him unaware. I don't doubt if he had heard our approach, he would have deserted the scene faster than greased lightning. Those creatures don't want to be seen by us, and given our human behaviour, I can't actually say I blame him or them. If I were wearing his shoes, I would also hide in the shadows. You saw him too, with your mummy, I gather, says the interviewer, addressing a cute-looking 10-year-old boy, with green dinosaur-like spikes running down the central panel of his head. He had large dimples on his cheeks and very bright, earnest hazel eyes. Do you think he was real? Or was he a man wearing a Bigfoot suit trying to scare you, do you think? The boy looks at the interviewer in astonishment, as if his suggestion about someone wearing a Bigfoot suit at that time of the morning was senselessly half-witted and exorbitantly farcical. I don't think anybody would wear a Bigfoot suit on the road at 2 o'clock in the morning, sir, he says. Also, he was too big to be human. We both saw him. It was a Bigfoot. We saw the muscles under his skin. We knew he was real. Were you scared of him, young man? Asked the interviewer. Or are you a very brave boy, do you think? The young boy again looks at the interviewer incredulously, with a look of, are you really that thick on his face? My mother told you, sir. He had kind eyes. He wasn't aggressive towards us. He looked at us, and then he glided away. He seemed nice, like the dragon in Warren and the Dragon series. I don't know if you know the books. The one who likes marshmallows. You knew he was nice, sir. Like Warren's dragon was nice. You just knew it. So there we are, a sight here in Tacoma, Washington. 2 people who swear they encountered the hairy man, otherwise known as Bigfoot, at 2 o'clock in the morning, on their way back home from the theatre. So what do you think? Do you think they encountered the hairy man we call Bigfoot? Right, like we believe that for a second, says Lisa, taking a swig of her beer. Where do they get all this feather-brained stuff from? They must think we swallow anything we're told, that we're completely naive. For goodness sake, everybody knows Bigfoots aren't real. They're just creatures of fiction. You mean you don't believe their account? Asks Victoria, looking at her friend in surprise, as she takes a bite of her pizza. Strings of mozzarella cheese dangle down the edges of the slice. I think the witnesses are incredibly credible. Why would they make all this up? I personally believe their account. That's because you're gullible, Victoria. You believe the very best in people. I'm a lot more discerning than you, I have to say. I think they saw something else that they thought was a Bigfoot. A case of mistaken identity. You know what your problem is, Lisa, says Victoria. You've always been so clever, and that can be your biggest undoing. You're like those opinionated professors out there that arrogantly think they know everything there is to know about everything, and everybody else in the entire world is so stupid, when in reality they might be academically bright, but they often lack an intuitive awareness and connection. They think they know everything about religion, everything about politics, everything about science, when in reality they know nothing at all, because they're so closed-minded and they're not open to possibilities. Just because you don't believe the witnesses' accounts does not mean that they're not actually telling the truth. I believe them, says Sally Ann, 100%. I know they're telling the truth. You can see they're profoundly moved by the experience. It could have been someone in a Bigfoot costume, says Lisa. I'm sorry, Lisa, but now even you're being ridiculous. It was blusteringly windy out there. It was cold weather. You think someone is going to stand in the middle of the road wearing a Bigfoot costume on the off chance they might stumble across some witnesses at 2 o'clock in the morning? I think that's a ludicrous suggestion, if you don't mind my saying so. Well, the Bigfoot costume would keep them warm, pipes Lisa. I imagine wearing all that, you're hardly going to suffer from hypothermia, are you?
How do you explain the huge size of the beast? Robin pipes. Are you telling me they can make costumes that increase your height to 8 foot tall and 4 foot wide, Lisa? Give me a break. You know what the problem with you academics around here is, like you, Lisa, is you're all so bloody scathing. You never believe a thing.
Why do I get a feeling that all of you are ganging up against me, says Lisa, just because I don't believe everything I hear? Well, I believe they exist, says Victoria. Little did she realise that soon she would uncover the truth to this mysterious question, and even her cynical friend Lisa would be forced to admit that the forests here in North America clandestinely cover up multiple secrets that many of us could never fathom were remotely possible or even plausible. But let's just say, seeing is believing. Victoria was blindly oblivious to the fact that on the celebration of her forthcoming 21st birthday, something outlandish was on the precipice of being birthed that would leave an indelible footprint on her life that could never ever be erased from her memory, her mind, or her wistful recall. 6 weeks later, Victoria's story. I'd organised 12 friends of mine to come on a day's hiking trip to celebrate my birthday on the Eagle's Peak Trail, a steep trail from the Nisqually River, where the head of the trail begins at the Suspension Bridge, on the east side of Logmire, through old-growth forest, with fabulous views of Mount Rainier, Nisqually Glacier and the Tatoosh Range. Me and my best girlfriends were very fit, keen walkers, passionate lovers of the great outdoors and of the natural world. But it seemed even living here in Washington State, our hesitant feet had not ventured very far and wide, and the intrepid adventurer buried within each and every one of us had been somewhat suppressed and subdued over the years. But now it was almost begging to come out, like the bird in a cuckoo clock, to be fully galvanized. It had been my inspirational, electrifying decision to invite my 12 close friends on this hike, to celebrate my forthcoming 21st birthday. But sometimes even your good friends can let you down when you least expect it, in ways you never imagined possible. And at the very last minute, I hasten to say. I was to find that this morning was going to be sullied with a dark cloud cover of disappointment when my cell phone began to vibrate. Little did I know these discouraging, vanquishing phone calls were going to flatten the mood of my enthusiasm, deflate my ebullience, and wantonly rob me of my hopes for the hiking trail that I'd been looking so forward to for weeks on end, and preparing for physically. The all-day hike on the Eagle's Peak Trail in Mount Rainier idea that I'd randomly spouted to my friends one night had been received with rapturous applause and unbridled enthusiasm. "What a brilliant idea!" they'd all chorused. "You can count me in. Wild horses wouldn't keep me away." Well, at the least I thought it was a great idea, until one by one, almost all 12 of my friends whom had accepted my invite began to turn me down at the very last minute, with the most nonsensical, harebrained excuses that carried no substance of weight with me, and were soiled, as far as I was concerned, with the tarnished spoils of a spurious deception. It was curiously bizarre. I couldn't make any sense of it. I'd received an incessant ribbon of phone calls a day before we were about to leave, within minutes of each other. It almost felt like a conspiracy. The first call came from my friend Kirsten. "Hello, Vix. It's me, Kirsten. Oh, about the trip to Mount Rainier. No, can't do, I'm afraid. Only gone and sprained my wretched ankle. The doc says I need to rest the thing. Oh, it's such a bummer. I won't be able to come, but don't worry, I can come to the restaurant the following day, when we're having the real celebration. I will hop there if I have to," she chuckles. I remember even after the first phone call, thinking that Kirsten was behaving so strangely, the way she talked about her ankle, and it certainly didn't sound genuine. It was almost as if she was reading from a script, even overacting. If Kirsten wanted to be persuasive, some acting lessons wouldn't go amiss. She wasn't fooling me for a second, but I chose not to bat an eyelid. I knew she hadn't really sprained her ankle. It was a fictitious, far-fetched, premeditated story, but she clearly had her preconceived reasons for choosing to bolt at the last minute, like a frightened horse from its paddock. What was going on? "I'm sorry you won't be coming," I say. "As you say, it is a bummer, but your uncle has made the decision for you, it seems. But at least you'll be coming to the restaurant the following evening, so I'll see you then." "Seems like that," she says. 10 minutes later, my caller ID lights up again. My cell phone vibrates. It was my friend Bridget. There was a huge pit in my stomach, as an ominous, unsettled feeling overcame me. Was she calling to cancel me as well? Now it was 2 down, 10 to go. It reminded me of that nursery rhyme, 10 green bottles hanging on the wall, and one by one they all accidentally fall. Were all my friends going to wantonly abandon my invitation, that had been once met with so much enthusiasm, but now everyone was getting cold feet about the hike? It was only a hike, for goodness sake, not a trip to Jupiter or Mars. This was not looking good. "Oh, it's me, Vix. It's Sue. Sorry, I won't be able to make the trip to Mount Rainier. I was so looking forward to it, really I was. But something's just come up. Sorry, it's personal. I can't talk about it at the moment, I'm afraid. I'm not privy to divulging any details." I sighed. Nothing had come up. The trouble was she couldn't find an excuse, so she was shrouding her deception in the convenience of an obsequious obscurity. Then 12 minutes later, after it, the phone rang again. This time it was Merrill. "I'm so sorry, Vic. We've had a dreadful disaster at home. The exterminator had to spray our apartment. It's been infested with cockroaches, so I'm moving in with my grandmother for a couple of days. She lives in another state, I'm afraid. Won't be able to come. Besides, I did breathe in some of those noxious, toxic fumes. I think my lungs might be permanently damaged. I am worried about that." "I'm sorry to hear that," I say, sounding so nonchalant and indifferent. "I hope you get the roaches under control." Are you kidding me? In the morning, all 12 of my friends were game for this trip, and now they were running away like rabbits diving into their burrows, frightened off by a fox. Let's just say I had never known a day to rain so many excuses that came pouring out of the heavens, almost as if it was raining cats and dogs. Believe me, it can rain here in Washington State, but this was a noxious fake rain that reeked of crafty, duplicitous cunning, monkey business, artful trickery. I didn't want to entertain any of these piddling, pathetic excuses that ranged from the ludicrously bizarre to the outrageously far-fetched and implausible. From "I've got food poisoning, the doc says I need to rest up," to "my grandmother's turtle has died, and she's having a funeral service for him on the day in question." I was lucky I had a thick skin, as I could have quite literally taken all this spurning repudiation quite personally, but I chose to not be affronted. If they didn't want to come to Mount Rainier, so be it then. It was their loss. I was rather bewildered, as we had talked about this must-do hiking trip incessantly, on numerous occasions. It was pretty shocking, as we were from Seattle, Washington, which is only 59 miles south-southeast from Mount Rainier, and we had the impertinent audacity never to have been on a hiking trail there before. If I was Mount Rainier, let's just say I would be more than a little put out and disgruntled about that. I did begin to wonder whether the rejected invites might possibly have something to do with taking a steeper hiking trail. Maybe my friends were pretending to be fitter than they actually were, had possibly highly exaggerated their physical prowess, and did not want to be humiliated by admitting the trail was more than they could actually take on. I mean, let's not kid. People from all over the world flocked here to Washington State to view some of the prepossessing, resplendent scenic delights the Pacific Northwest has to offer. More notably, the arresting allure of Mount Rainier, that has held many a visitor here speechless with wonder. I had to laugh at the irony of ironies. It was amazing how everyone was available for the party the following evening, which involved alcohol and a plethora of champagne and bubbles. But no, they couldn't come on this hiking trip, not at all. My group was now whittled down to only 3 of us, whom appeared to be as bright-eyed and bushy-tailed as I was to go to Mount Rainier. I would admit that my mood had dampened considerably, and the trip had lost some of its promising shine, like a pair of old leather shoes that no longer gleams as much as it used to. My boyfriend Robin had encouraged my flagging spirits. He was good like that. "Don't let it get you down, Victoria. People can be
Idiosyncratic. They can have strange motives over things. Why your friends are making so many excuses and a mountain out of a molehill out of everything, God only knows. But don't you dare worry about anybody else. You worry about yourself. You know you've always longed to go to Mount Rainier. Don't let a few loser dropouts spoil your fun. Besides, with 3 of you going together, it might be even more exhilarating, more intimate with the 3 of you. It would be crazy not to go. You've lived here all your life and never been to Mount Rainier. You know how insanely ridiculous that sounds. It's like a pirate never returning to the treasure he buried. It's madness.
You think so? I say, looking rather beleaguered.
Absolutely,
he says, shrugging his shoulders, running a large hand through his ruffled black curls, and looking somewhat reflective.
Never had any sisters myself. Never fully understood woman. All this pussyfooting around, all this drama, all these inventive excuses. It's ridiculous. I think men were much more inclined to tell the truth. Sorry, bro, can't come, not in the mood. But your lot, the extent of their imprudent artfulness is uncanny.
Lisa, my academic friend, cynical about so many things, had stepped up to the plate and had not let me down. Don't worry about the others, Vicky, she was saying. They're just losing out, that's all. But I wouldn't miss this experience for the world. I glanced at her expression, and even she appeared to look as if her words did not completely ring true, as if behind the ebullient positive facade was a less than eager participant in this adventure. I just can't believe all the excuses, I say to her. I mean, a funeral service for a turtle, a cockroach infestation, and an ankle that is badly sprained. Everyone has a ridiculous excuse, and let's just say I don't believe any of them. Don't let them bother you, she says. I'm sure they have all manner of clandestine reasons they can't come. But don't be offended. It's not personal. For some reason it's less reckless to tell a white lie than to tell the truth. Sometimes I think it's this inbuilt desire in us to not upset someone. It's easier to say, I can't come because my uncle fell into the stew with the dumplings and is currently in hospital receiving treatment for 3rd-degree burns, than to say, sorry, I can't come because I don't feel like trekking up a high incline. Well, guess what, Lisa? I'd so much prefer the truth. I don't want to come because the trail is too steep, and I'm worried about my fitness levels, or I don't want to come because I'm just flat out too exhausted and the trail would wear me to a frazzle. Would be a damn sight better for me than making up some of the baloney I've been listening to. Just call it creative expression, says Lisa, an opportunity to be inventive. But if you're going to make up an excuse, be comical, for God's sake. Say something like, I changed my lock on the door and can't get out. Would have been a wee bit more funny. I don't think there's anything funny about that, Lisa. I would have said, that's not a problem. I'll call out a locksmith for you. So that wouldn't work. But I get where you're coming from. If they're going to lie, try and be more creative about it. Having said that, having a funeral for a turtle was quite innovative in my opinion. But certainly not believable. For so long, I had talked about visiting Mount Rainier National Park. It offers over 260 well-maintained trails that lead through old-growth forests, river valleys, streams, fields of wild flowers, and a network of awe-inspiring glaciers. Mount Rainier is the largest stratovolcano in the Cascade Range of the Pacific Northwest, with snow cascading over its mountains all year round. It is the highest volcanic peak in the contiguous United States, with the largest alpine glacier system outside of Alaska, and the world's last volcanic cave system. It was a Tuesday morning, when me and my friend Lisa and Sally Ann chose to explore the Eagle Peak Trail with me. We arrived at our destination rather early in the morning. Let's just say it was more than we'd bargained for, an upward ascent that was giving our lungs strain as we breathed heavily to catch our breaths, realizing that mountain goats we were most certainly not, and our challenging sessions at the gym could not compensate or compete with climbing up this arduous trail. We had been warned that it would be tough going, but we were eager and enthusiastic about proceeding on our way, our moods ebullient, our hearts filled with hopeful promise, our eyes eager to feast on the fabulously arresting views we would encounter upon our way. Our innermost desires were to conquer this challenge, as it was high on our lists of goals. I had always thoroughly appreciated rising above a challenge. It offered within me that sense of accomplishment. We were the only 3 people on the trail that morning. There was no one else around. It was very silent. It felt as if the mountains, the trees, the alpine meadows were all ours this morning. We were all wearing walking shoes, windbreakers, and the all-important layers, which means you can remove or replace clothes. It was a beautiful spring day. Winter was now behind us, and was all but a distant memory, and this was one of the first days we'd actually been out in the fresh air, appreciating the soft rays of sunshine that so generously caressed our shoulders and backs with a pleasing warmth. We soaked in its sunshine like hungry lizards. The sky was a magnificent cobalt blue that day, gently feathered with a soft spray of fluffy white cloud cover. The terrain was so heavily littered with rocks of all shapes and sizes, in an ascending trajectory, which could be tumultuous, as without a good grip you could easily slip on some of those loose stones that commandeered and sequestered the path like a dried-up old riverbed. There were some wide-open spaces between the trees, and beyond the path a billowing alpine meadow, scattered liberally with red creeping ground covers, grasses and wild flowers in pretty colours, that literally danced against the gentle breeze. There were tall trees, namely mountain spruces, hemlocks and Douglas firs, I think they were, that lined our trail between the undulating heavy contours of the mountain. They penciled up into the skyline like tall skinny giants, covered in bountiful needled regalia and verdant glad rags. "Wow, this is steep," says Sally. "I can't believe the others turned down this fabulous trip, all because of a bit of superstition. It's preposterous. I wouldn't have missed this for the world." I stopped dead in my tracks, glancing over at both of my friends. I noticed Lisa's eyes are rolling at Sally, with that "now you've blown it" kind of look on her face. "What the hell are you two talking about?" "What superstitions?" I ask, looking quizzically from one friend to the other, who are both growing in varying shades of fuchsia. "Lisa, I'm sorry, I say, but what the hell is going on? Don't think I haven't seen you giving Sally that warning look. What are the 2 of you not telling me? Whatever it is, don't you dare fob me off. This is my 21st birthday, for goodness sake. Don't I at the very least deserve to know what's going on with all of our friends? An explanation for everybody's incongruous behaviour towards this trip might be nice for a start. I mean, it really was a blow to the guts, everyone turning me down at the very last minute with their whimpering, pathetic excuses. It really hurt, but Robin told me not to let it get me down. But let me tell you, it did. "Let's sit down for a second and have a drink," says Lisa promptly, realising that I'm not going to be hoodwinked. She opens her backpack, pulling out 3 small bottles of Mountain Dew, which we drink in this glorious wooded sanctuary. The sweetness is so refreshing, and sitting down on the soft grass is pleasantly pleasing. "I'm sorry," says Sally. "I didn't mean to spill the beans. But most of the girls didn't want to come today. Nancy had a bad premonition about the trip. She thought something not so good could happen to us." "Did she now?" I say sarcastically, feeling an indignant anger surfing up in the back of my throat, on the waves of a putrid nausea. "So she thought she'd infest everyone with fear, so no one would come on this trip with me, while not even having the balls to tell me why she wasn't coming. She made a pathetic excuse, I think it was, about babysitting her nephew. So what kind of premonition did she actually have? I'm really not happy to be the last person to know about this. Thanks a bunch for keeping me in the dark." She said it was just a bad feeling. You know the girls take her seriously. I mean, remember when Meryl wanted to put off visiting her grandmother a while back? Nancy told her she needed to go, as that would be the last time she'd see her grandmother alive. She was right. Meryl was so thrilled to be able to spend quality time with her grandmother, thanks to Nancy's intuitive inklings. Then there was that time she told Sue not to go out the following weekend with her brother. It turned out his truck was involved in a really bad collision, and the passenger seat was annihilated. That side of the truck was a total write-off. Let's just say if Susan had gone that weekend with her brother in that truck, she wouldn't be here now today. So everyone is inclined to listen to Nancy. She seems to be highly perceptive, very intuitive. She's got a bit of a psychic gift, I think you call it. Is that what you call it, I say? I'm now feeling so mad, I actually want to scream. You would have thought that Nancy would have had the decency to tell me about her misgivings, instead of lying to me outright so blazonly. It might have been nice of her to say, "Hello, Vicky. I've had a bad hunch about the trip to Mount Rainier." I might have actually listened to her, changed the date for goodness sake, so that we could have all taken this trip together another time. We've been talking about this hike for ages. Everyone was itching to come. She didn't want to upset you. She didn't want to upset me. Are you kidding me? I've never heard anything so ridiculous in all my life. In other words, something bad is going to happen to you when you go on the Eagle's Trail, but I won't bother to tell you. You know that's crazy. Nancy says you call her premonitions mumbo-jumbo. She told you never believed a word of any of them. You just said they were coincidences. Yes, I did, but that still makes no difference. I would have fully appreciated not to have been left in the dark like this. That was a spiteful thing to do. I knew everyone's excuses were blatant lies. If I didn't have a rhino hide for a skin, I could have felt very rejected. I was still hurt. I glanced at both of my friends pointedly. Why did you decide to come, given what Nancy told you? That must have really ruffled your feathers. I'm bewildered you both didn't make up some spurious, ingenious excuses to fob me off, like everybody else did. I'm like you, says Sally Ann. I don't believe in all that gobbledygook tripe. I don't think Nancy's got any extraordinary special powers over the rest of us, nor does she have psychic ability. Let's not kid, we all have intuitions. I didn't get any bad vibes about coming on this trail today. For goodness sake, it's enchantingly magnificent here. What could possibly go wrong on a trail like this? I can't wait to see the egg on Nancy's face when we tell them all that nothing went wrong and that her premonitions were seriously warped. What about you, Lisa? Why did you come? Lisa flushes awkwardly. I didn't really want to come on the trip today, she admits. I'm not going to lie. I know that I'm a cynic normally, but Nancy scared me. She was so convincingly persuasive, spouting all that mischievous blather. She had me completely fooled, but I knew I couldn't lie to you. Besides, you looked so despondent, so crestfallen. I just couldn't let you down. Look, I say, if you want to call this hike quits, tell me now. We can always go back. I won't take any offence. What has hurt me the most is everybody failing to tell me what was going on. But I don't want to call it quits, says Lisa. Nor do I, says Sally Ann. It's a beautiful day. Look at it. It would be crazy to go back, says Lisa again. Now we're here, everything that Nancy says is beginning to look like drivel, hocus-pocus stuff and nonsense. Besides, I don't have any discomposing, discouraging feelings about the trail. Are you sure? I asked the both of them. Absolutely, they say together in unison. I would be broken-hearted if we went back, says Sally Ann. It would make us the quintessential wet blankets. It really would. The three of us amble up on the enterprising, majestic mountain slope, towards the prepossessing summit. The path is smoother than earlier on in our walk. The treacherousness of the rocks is overtaken by the perilous dangers of reaching a much higher elevation, where if you took a tumble, there would be a long way for you to fall. The voluptuous curvatures, rocky appendages of the mountains, with their rugged, masterful contours, sweep up against the skyline, in pronounced sculptural resplendence, while trees, thickly dense with needles, especially on their lower branches, audaciously jut out through the soil, in a verdant ascension, with an unrestrained, cheeky presumptuousness. When you cast your eyes upon the lower valley, it's like you're seeing an ocean of rocks being sprayed liberally with white foam. But what you're really seeing is the smoky vapour of the cloud cover hovering over the rocky outcrops. It's when we reach the very top of the trail and are watching everything around us for miles that me and my friends hear this terrifying, discomposing scream that seizes our attention. It's unlike anything we've ever heard before. The colour has quite literally drained from our faces. My legs begin to quiver like jelly. I look at Lisa and Sally Ann in alarm, and I hear it again. It sounds like a vicious, obnoxious roar. It seems to echo through the valley. The sound is airily haunting. We've got to get out of here, pipes Lisa. We need to go. Something's very wrong. Something's wrong. We have to leave now. Sally Ann is the more assertive, the pluckiest one among us, and not given to being easily persuaded to just leave. Don't you want to see what's actually going on? Something's up here. It's making that god-awful noise. Don't you want to know what it actually is? I'm not sure I do, I say. I'm not feeling desperately brave. I actually feel I'm going to wet myself, I say, crossing my legs so tightly. I think I'm going to quickly go behind the tree over there. I'll be back in a tick. Don't go without me. Otherwise, I just will wet myself. I quickly hurry towards the tree. As I'm squatting down behind this mountain hemlock, that's when I see them through the branches. I can hardly believe it. They're two creatures, one that I can only describe as looking like a werewolf. And let's just say he was the ugliest, grossest thing that I've ever beheld. For a moment, I'm so astounded. I stop midway in my pee, wondering if I'm really seeing this. You've got to be kidding me. This sort of thing never happens to me. My life is routinely uneventful, exceedingly normal. But there is nothing commonplace, nothing normal about what I'm beholding now. I mean, werewolves. Who ever believed that such enigmatic, ambiguous creatures actually existed? The thing that struck me the most was the length of his arms. They trailed well beyond his knees. He had human-looking hands with pronounced claw-like nails that could do some serious damage. His face was exactly like a wolf, with pert ears and a wolf-like muzzle. The creature was about 7 foot tall, standing up on 2 feet like a human being. But it was what he was doing that demanded my attention. I kid you not, this bizarre-looking creature was having an incandescent altercation with an intimidating-looking Bigfoot. The Bigfoot was dauntingly enormous, preposterously so. I think he could have been 10 foot tall, 9 to 1000 pounds, and 4 foot wide across his powerful shoulders, that would make many weightlifters or wrestlers look pitifully puny. He was covered in long flowing dark hair, built like a heavy piece of farming machinery. He looked like the kind of creature that could not be taken down very easily. It would be like having a fist fight with a combine harvester. You're going to end up being seriously hurt. The Bigfoot let out a shrill whistle. It echoed over the valley. It possibly could have been heard for miles around, although you might think it was possibly a bird call. I could hear several whistles returning, but they seemed far away. I got the sense he was calling for reinforcements. But he was so much bigger than this werewolf, it wasn't difficult to see who was going to win this battle. I'm still squatting down, not even moving a muscle, even though I've finished my ablutions, but I just can't look away, nor can I do up my jeans. The only way I can describe it is when you observe a fatal accident on the highway. You want to look away, you rarely do, but you can't, as an inquisitive curiosity is urging you to take a second peek, even though you know whatever you're going to see, it's not going to be good. I don't know what this fight was actually about, but I have a sneaking suspicion it may have been territorial. What I did perceive is an immense hatred between these two creatures. The likes of such I have never ever witnessed before, not even among human beings. Even watching it was so palpable, I could actually feel the hatred, as much as I could feel the whipping wind, as at this height there was a pretty boisterous wind blowing, and was flapping against the mountains, the trees, against our clothes, with a forceful efficiency. Indeed, it beat against my face, was feisty in its tenacity. The capricious werewolf-like creature looked as evil as death, as if he belonged to the dominion of hell, while the Bigfoot almost seemed angelic by contrast. It really was rather like watching the war between good and evil. The werewolf was snarling. His nostrils were flaring. His jagged, angry canine teeth were clearly on display. He was using all his resources to intimidate and subdue. The creature let out a vicious, guttural growl. Everything happened so quickly. I indicated for my friends to quickly come and join me. They tiptoed quietly towards the tree, squatting down next to me, to watch these extraordinary proceedings. We were looking at each other with eyes as wide as saucers. Like me, my friends were equally as gripped. I think fascination and intrigue had conquered our fear. Also, we knew these creatures were not after us. They were at war with each other. My friends are mouthing to me, "You've got to be kidding." Lisa had always believed Bigfoot was a creature of fiction. She was trembling with a mixture of abject astonishment and wondrous awe. I think we all felt we'd been propelled into some kind of alternative universe. We watch as the Bigfoot punches the werewolf directly in the jaw. With such powerful punches, he does this 2 or 3 times, and it looks as if the jaw of the creature is completely mangled. Several teeth come flying out of the creature's mouth. The jaw crumbles away, falling to the floor. The creature's still alive, but it's like he's spaced out. As his eyes roll back in their sockets, he crumbles in a defeated heap on the ground, like a camping chair that has lost its legs. The Bigfoot finishes the creature off with 2 more swipes of the fist. It's almost like his powerful punches are as effective as bullets fired from a high-caliber weapon. As the head of the werewolf comes flying off, the Bigfoot picks the headless creature up, throwing it over his shoulders like a large sack of potatoes, and then down the valley below, where it somersaults into the air until it vanishes into a hazy oblivion, disappearing and vanishing beneath a dense, cloudy vapour. Let's get out of here now, I say, quickly doing up my zipper, dashing precariously down the downward slope, almost stumbling and tripping over myself in my earnest haste to get away. I don't want to hang around for a moment longer. We quickly move down the path as fast as we can, our breath heavy, our hearts flapping violently, and every hair on the back of our necks is standing on edge. We see a plethora of trees moving, not just from the wind, but something else is moving them. They're not just twitching, they're actually bending over. We hear heavy, ponderous footsteps charging up the mountainous ravine at a hectically dramatic speed that sounds ominously like bison thundering across the open plains. The ground is heaving, groaning, trembling under the heavy weight of whatever is approaching us at what seems to be in a tearing hurry. We see a couple of black silhouettes passing us, moving and weaving between the trees. I instinctively know that they're Bigfoot. One directly comes hurrying down our path, swinging its arms and legs vigorously, moving with an enviable agility. But this one is smaller. It's about 7 foot tall, with small breasts, and its face is profoundly human. On seeing us, she gives us a friendly nod, seems to smile at us through these congenial golden eyes. And then she's gone right up to the area where we'd been only moments earlier. How extraordinary. After our encounter with her, our fear literally dwindles away. It morphs into an animated excitement. Did you see her? Oh my God! Did you see her? Oh my word, those eyes! Those eyes! Those golden eyes! They were so beautiful! Oh my word! They were incredible! She was incredible! As we make our way down the path, we hear these excited whoops. They literally infiltrate the whole valley, followed by a plethora of whistles. I think the Bigfoots are celebrating the demise of the werewolf. I can't blame them for that. It was the ugliest, grotesquest creature that I've ever beheld. You know what, said Sally Ann, when we reached the car. This was one hell of a hike. Our timing was perfect. 2 seconds out of alignment, we could have missed it all. To cut a long story short, when I gathered around my sheepish friends for my birthday party or celebration at the Palisade restaurant in Seattle, which had been around forever and a day, well renowned for its fabulous food, and during the day does boast spectacular views. All my friends arrive looking wonderfully dressed in their finest clothes. They drape me with a plethora of presents and cards. Kirsten runs to give me a huge hug, with no sign whatsoever of a sprained ankle. How's your ankle feeling? Kirsten, I ask, pointingly keeping a straight face and trying to look very concerned. Oh, it was dreadful. Gave me a lot of pain. But would you believe it? The pain seems to have melted away just in time for your birthday. It's those painkillers the doctor gave me. Bloody marvellous they are. Well, I suppose miracles can happen, I say scathingly. How about your lungs, Merrill? Have they been infected by the fumigation spray used on the roaches? Merrill flushes a bright red colour. Much better, thanks, she says. Much better. How did the funeral go for the turtle at your grandmother's place? I ask my friend Lorna. Oh, it went very well in the circumstances. I mean, my grandmother's very, very attached to that turtle, so we had to make a big thing of it, as you can understand. Of course, I say. All 11 of my friends are champing at the bit to find out exactly what transpired at Mount Rainier, and whether Nicky's premonitions carried any weight at all. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. They'd have to smoke the truth out of me. "Go on," says Kirsten. "Tell us what happened at Mount Rainier." "You missed a fabulous trail," I said. "It was steep, quite treacherous, but the views, when you reach the summit, they're arresting, very bewitching." "That's it," says Kirsten, frowning. She passes Nicola a cursory look. "Nothing untoward happened on the trail, or even on the drive to the park." "Like what?" I ask. "Well, you didn't approach any fatal accidents on the way, something like that. Nothing bad." "What are you talking about?" I say, looking nonplussed and exaggerating my surprise. "Come to think of it, we did actually see something," I say. Kirsten's face lights up brightly. "Yes, what did you see?" "We saw a werewolf and a couple of Bigfoots." There's a long pause, as all of my friends look at each other in abject disbelief. "Is this some kind of a wind-up? You didn't see a Bigfoot, did you? A werewolf? That's crazy. Those things don't even exist." "It's a pity you weren't there," I say, "because now you'll really never know, will you? You'll always be left wondering. But I don't have to wonder about a turtle's funeral, a so-called sprained ankle, or a fumigation for cockroaches, because I know it's all just a bunch of poor excuses that have no foundation in the truth. But you on the other hand, were not with us on that trail, so you'll never really know what you missed, will you? So there you are. That's my story." Dear Sarah, and all your lovely listeners, it's a spectacular morning. Even the cock announced its arrival with a loud cock-a-doodle-doo. But I was like Dracula, confined to the darkness of my cosy burrow, or in his case a coffin, until the light spoilt all the fun. I should have risen earlier, especially when the pugnacious unwelcome sunlight had audaciously trespassed into my bedroom, pushing abruptly through the crack in the long white curtains that I always failed to close correctly. It rudely interrupts the cool sanctuary of my darkened bedroom, breezing above the shining wooden floorboards, bouncing buoyantly over my bed covers, in speckles of radiant interfering sunlight that are not subdued or repressed in their vibrant tenacity, which would have aroused the less fatigued, but not me. I was too exhausted to actually care. I'd never been this tired before. Even getting out of bed just to shut the curtains to block out this rude, invasive intrusion is too much trouble for me, despite my blue eyes that are withering as they squint from its blinding effects. In mock retaliation against this meddling, impudent light, I bury my face in the pillow to block it all out. If I had my way, I would sleep for many days at a time, only daring to climb out of bed for brief refreshments. I have thought about this an awful lot, just living in bed for an entire week, having takeaways delivered to my bedroom, should an impertinent hunger invade my bouts of deep sleep, with its furious demands. Then I would order some of my absolute favourite foods, from pizza to Chinese takeaways. I would pig out, falling asleep from the physical exertion of my overindulgence. It's a very attractive idea, that one day I fully intend to orchestrate, burying myself amidst my bed covers, hibernating like a squirrel, a raccoon or a bear. You dream of scenarios like this when you're as frazzled as I am right now. In truth, I feel worn out, like a piece of old washing that's been through the spin dryer and washing cycle time and time again, and has been stretched and punnelled beyond recognition. Now I am faded, bedraggled, and completely exhausted. I realise that they're right, whoever they are, that moving can be one of the biggest stresses of your entire life. Certainly in line with divorce, or possibly even losing a loved one. That sounds dramatic, I know. In fact, I'd thought that was a preposterous suggestion, outrageously unreasonable. I mean, how hard could it be to relocate? I have a friend of mine who has lived in Singapore, Hong Kong, London, and various states all over America, and she makes moving look like a walk in the park. I think perhaps I was exorbitantly fooled by her nonchalant approach about moving, because it's nothing like she makes it out to be. "Oh, it's no big deal," she had assured me with a bright sunny smile on her face. "I've done it hundreds of times. I've moved from Singapore to America. That was the worst. But don't worry, it's pretty plain sailing. Are you kidding me? I had no idea what sea that she was sailing on when she moved. But for us, moving was anything but plain sailing or elementary, even though we were just moving to another state. Moving is one of the most stressful, debilitating, taxing and nerve-wracking things I've ever done in my entire life. The hardest part of leaving was saying goodbye to my lifelong friends, most whom swore blind I wouldn't like the slow pace of life outside of Boston. I'd be back to my old roots and all that I've ever known in a heartbeat. I was not sure they were right. Little did I realise that packing your whole life away in boxes, cleaning up the apartment you've been renting for many years until it shines like a new pin, and relocating to another part of the world where you don't know a living soul is definitely an arduous challenge that is not for the faint-hearted. My enchanting new lakefront house in the countryside, that I'd fallen in love with the moment I laid eyes on, was now liberally scattered with boxes in every single room, marked in black pen which room the box actually belonged to, like kitchen, dining room, and so forth. There were pictures and mirrors lined against the wall, still wrapped up in bubble wrap, and the idea of unpacking all this stuff was so intimidating, so daunting, so incredibly overwhelming. I had found it almost impossible to just drag myself out of bed every morning, and today was no exception. I continued to soak in this upheaval, the chaos of our tumultuous move, like a dog that's been chasing a rabbit for hours on end, and is so burnt out he can't move a muscle anymore. Yes, that's a good description. Burnt out. That's exactly how I feel. It was my fiancé's suggestion that we move to the country. He knew in the future we would be having a family of our own. He believed raising our children in the natural world was very significant. "You know," he says to me one day, when we're sharing a bottle of Pinot Noir together, and he becomes very reflective. Wine had always melted away Tom's reserved reticence, rather like butter on a piece of toast. "When I was 15 years old, I went to stay with a very good friend of mine, on his uncle's farm in Montana. That was the best time I've ever had in my young life. I learnt things about the natural world that I'd never appreciated before. I was astonished by the worms in the soil, the birds, the animals, the incredible miracles of nature. I was appalled by how disconnected I was to it all. That's what living in the city can do to you. An urban environment conflicts with nature. I don't want our kids to grow up not comprehending the earth. I want them to feel it between their fingers, so that it crumbles in their hands. Explore what's hidden under the rocks, to go fishing, to climb trees, to ride on remote country lanes in the wilderness on their bicycles. I think in discovering nature, you find yourself. That's what happened to me in Montana. When I returned to Boston after that break, I was a different creature altogether, a much better one, a much more compassionate human being. Let's just say that I'd lived in Boston all my life. The idea of moving to the countryside was less than agreeable to me. I was comfortable with what I knew. Boston was a fabulous place to live, a coastal university city, with so much to offer. I had a warped, distorted, somewhat misaligned perception that living in the countryside would be tediously boring, dull, uninspiring. Granted, my fiancé Tom and I were living in a pedestrian, mediocre high-rise apartment block in Jamaica Plain that was considered a more affordable part of Boston. It was about 25 minutes away from downtown. I liked the student youthful vibe here, and I had accumulated so many friends over the years, so leaving was never on the cards for me, not even for a moment. My fiancé wanted to accept a job transfer to Grand Marias, Minnesota, which is located in Cook County and is known as Great Marsh in French, given to it by the French explorers that came to this part of the world and settled here. The town itself is situated on the northern shores of Lake Superior and is considered one of the coolest towns in small-town Minnesota, with quaint main streets, general stores, and fabulous ice cream parlours, the quintessential escape from city life. Let's just say I clandestinely had in mind to humour my fiancé Tom by just visiting the town, viewing various properties that were for sale around the northern shore of Lake Superior, I knew that putting my foot down would be unreasonable, as that would make me like a closed door, not open to change. I needed to humour my fiancé, go through the motions of at least visiting the place. I had in mind that I would ultimately persuade him that life near a small town, around a lake, was not for me. In truth, that was how I was expecting to react. But what I hadn't anticipated was that the prepossessing views of Lake Superior, glittering like an exquisite silvery jewel under the morning sun, the arresting countryside, the quaint, small, charming town, would quite literally hold me hostage to a reverent awe. I found my instinctive reservations about this part of the world beginning to dwindle away, like the white smoke from a chimney, until they dissipated completely. Let's just say this I had not expected to happen. And quite suddenly, the idea of moving to the northern shore of Lake Superior, a 24-hour car journey away from Boston, didn't seem like half such a bad idea, after all. I had engaged in tireless, futile arguments with my fiancé Tom about how I never wanted to leave Boston, how I couldn't, how it would be impossible to do. He had told me that I was a little like someone in a restaurant ordering the same food over and over again, tentatively reluctant to order something new in case it would not meet with my approval, too afraid of facing my own disappointment. Tom said I was prudently unadventurous, and he was the one that would push me to try something different on the menu. And more often than not, when I did do that, I was rather surprised that I actually enjoyed the food. It was true I was resolutely circumspect, conventional, cautiously set in my ways, with an erroneous, unwarranted acumen that had persuaded me that leaving behind everything I'd ever known to begin a brand new life would be the most nonsensical, idiotic, irrational, and brazenly injudicious thing that I'd ever done. Let's just say the day me and my fiancé Tom drove down the long asphalt driveway of this Lake Superior home, situated on the north shore of Lake Superior, I could actually feel my heart pounding in my chest, not from fear, but from a smouldering excitement that I didn't want to feel, and a reverential, wondrous awe that held me captive to its powerful, inspirational persuasions. You would have had a heart as hard as a rock, and eyes that were clearly dimming, not to be seduced by the beguiling views I was beholding. The house was surrounded by undulating green hilly terrain that was bespeckled with a plethora of tall towering trees, clustered together in congenial groups that seemed to smile at us as we made our approach, while the house overlooked the lake, with a long ribbon of sandy beach that graced its shores so elegantly. Suffice to say, we arrived at the house minutes before the estate agent. Not only was I impressed by the size of the house that seemed to squat happily on its sturdy foundations, as if it had always belonged here, as if even the earth had rooted her from a little seed, like one of the trees themselves. The house was seemingly so comfortable in its own skin, a delightful architect's creation, on 2 stories, with large glass windows, sliding doors, high ceilings, a wraparound porch that curled around the front of the home in a magnanimous warm hug. It would seem the house incorporated the use of stone and wood, natural materials complementary to the landscape, very befitting to the rich, vibrant fauna and flora. For a moment me and my fiancé sit in the truck, staring at the house. Neither of us dare to say a word. We both seem to want to bask in the view, soak in the energy of this tranquil oasis, like breathing in a fabulously beautiful fragrance for the very first time, and becoming acquainted with its many subtle, elusive, delicate notes. In my heart there's an interior tug-of-war going on that my fiancé Tom knows absolutely nothing about, rather like 2 female wrestlers inside of me, fighting each other, both defiant about winning. In my case, the wrestler that doesn't want to make Lake Superior home, that has muscles and power, whom I'd put all my money on to win, is rapidly losing this battle against her nimble, slight opponent, whom didn't stand a chance in the beginning, but boy, how the tables have turned, and an unlikely winner is now raising the trump card. How I wanted to hate this place. I wanted to be unstirred, aloof, unmoved, like a tall, stubborn, bull-headed redwood tree, resolutely headstrong in its residential rooted occupancy, stuck to its foundations with sturdy, robust, vigorous roots that run so deep it's impossible to dig it up or to relocate it to another spot. Something is whispering into my heart. It's so beautiful, so beautiful, is it not? My eyes melt like rich, luxuriant chocolate. My mouth stretches out into a wide, broad grin, while my heartstrings are being forcefully tugged, as hard as a church bell, and my unshakable, pertinacious, intransigent convictions not to be tempted have blown away like a dandelion seed on the wind. It's no use. This place has already crept under my skin. My fiancé Tom is turning around to look at my expression, to observe my reaction to this idyllic lakefront home. I try to maintain that blank screen kind of look, that nonchalant indifference, as if I've been unmoved by this exquisite home. I don't want him to know that I'm completely enamoured, blown away by this dreamy, poetic oasis. Well, not yet, anyway. I don't want to see the self-satisfied, smug, I-told-you-so look on his face. My fiancé is a handsome man. He's absolutely 100% my type in every single regard. As shallow as it sounds, it was his boyish good looks at a party at a friend's house that made me amble over towards him at the barbecue over a year ago, where he was turning over the meat for the guests. It was sausages, hot dogs, sticky spare ribs and chicken kebabs that were on offer that night, and the sizzling, aromatic, meaty, flavourful, spicy smells were absolutely delicious. I pretended I wanted to give him a helping hand, to cook some of those burgers. He didn't need my help, but I pretended he did. I was much more interested in getting to know this unassuming, self-effacing man. So I stood determinedly around the smouldering woody flames of the grill, talking to him for ages. We connected. The rest is history. I'm glad he was so much more than his boyish looks, as in my opinion, personality, humour, integrity, charm are the quintessential ingredients for a successful relationship, as well as being the very best of friends. Without those essential, crucial ingredients, you're pretty much doomed, I think. An attractive box of chocolates is good to look at, but if the chocolates taste insipid, you certainly have a raw deal. I'd always been attracted to the politely reserved, introverted types that would never ever take the initiative to ask you out, due to their timorous reticence, the type that you needed to push to be persuaded to ask you out. I also loved men with boyish looks, and Tom was every bit a cute-looking boy, with a baby face, cute dimples on his cheeks, brown hazel eyes, and soft wavy brown hair. And let's just say I was smitten before he even asked me out. He presents a Matt Damon or a young Leonardo DiCaprio look, if you get my drift. So he says to me as we're sitting in the car together, staring at this gorgeous lakefront house, "Tamara, what do you think?" "I think it's beautiful," I say. "Rarely beautiful." Tom reaches out to grab my hand. He gives it a friendly squeeze. "You did not expect to like this place, did you? You were hoping you weren't going to like it. Like at the time at the Italian restaurant, you wanted pizza again. I asked you to try the gnocchi. You didn't want to try it, but you love it now." "Your point is—" "My point is, Tamara, I can see the begrudging walls of Jericho are beginning to tumble down. You could possibly be persuaded to move here." Now, don't you dare get cocky with me. I haven't said that I'm persuaded, but let's just say I will concede that this place is beguilingly beautiful. But then again, so are many holiday destinations around the globe. But it doesn't mean that I want to just up and leave everything I know and move in. Tom is grinning from ear to ear. "Methinks the lady protests too much," he pipes. Suddenly we hear the very distinctive purring sound of a truck hastening its approach. Rubber tyres roll down the smooth sweep of asphalt, gliding seamlessly in a parking position about 10 feet away from us, where the truck grinds to a swift halt. I hear the engine switching off. "Ah, that'll be the estate agent," says Mark, climbing out of the truck. He rushes over to my door to open it for me. Something he's always done. He's the perfect gentleman like that. The estate agent is a man in his early 30s, with a brisk business-like manner and a large, warm smile. He shakes our hands warmly,
and leads us around the property. It's a lovely home, designed by the original owner. He was an artist. Lots of artists in this part of the world, he says. They come here to paint the glorious lake views, the awe-inspiring sunsets. It's dreamy out here. The perfect escape from city life. I understand the both of you are from Boston. Is that right?
That would be right, says Mark. Tired of the city? Asks the estate agent quizzically.
Well, I am, admits Tom. I mean, I've lived in Boston all my life, and I really do love the natural world. I fancy living somewhere very, very beautiful, somewhere like this. But my fiancée Tamara needs to be tempted to change her mind. She's very set in her ways. Well, to be fair, it is a completely different way of life out here, admits the estate agent. Very different to Boston, I should imagine. Much slower than the city. But I've never known any city people ever regretting moving here. Something about this place, it steals your heart, gets under your skin.
So the previous owner designed this house himself, I ask. You say he wasn't even a proper architect. But it's so perfect. He's thought of absolutely everything. I love that this house has an attic, and it has a cellar. I love the incorporation of wood and stone, the avant-garde lighting, the cosy large fireplaces, the fabulous sliding doors, with floor-to-ceiling windows, overlooking such arresting views. Not to mention a kitchen that is so modern, so sophisticated. I would be quite happy to invite Gordon Ramsay around to cook dinner for me in this kitchen. It's perfect.
Well, if you do invite Gordon Ramsay around to your kitchen, I hope you'll be inviting me to dinner. He's rather a particularly good cook, I imagine. Anyway, when it comes to artists, they do know how to bring the natural contours of nature into the home. Hence the curve of the staircase there, the use of natural materials, the seamless flow of the rooms as they glide into each other so effortlessly.
After I'd been shown around the property, I found the Ice Queen in my heart melted away like the snow on a very hot day, so that there were no reservations left at all. I was completely won over by this place. I wanted this house with all my heart. I said to Tom, "You've got to put an offer in. We can't lose this place. We simply have to have it."
That's a big turnaround for you. But isn't that a bit hasty? He asks me. We haven't seen any other homes yet. Don't you think we should look at alternative properties first for sale, before we just pounce on the first place we see? But I do admit this is a particularly lovely home.
"But I want this house," I say defiantly, realising that I'm sounding like a petulant spoilt brat that won't take no for an answer. But I don't care. I don't care how obnoxious or self-entitled I sound. I am consumed with an inexplicable, frenzied desire to own this property. Now leaving Boston to live out here has hit me with a tsunami of overwhelming desire that can't be subdued or discouraged. One thing about me, that although I'm very set in my ways, doggedly set in them sometimes, when I do change my mind, my decisions are ultimately always fixed, like a house is on sturdy foundations. Stubbornness is my middle name. I'm told that this is because of the bull-headed side of my personality that is typically found in the Taurus birth sign. "I don't want to look at any other houses," I explained to Tom. "I've made my mind up on this. Don't go playing games with the price. Remember how my mother did that with the house she lost. We can't lose this house. Go with the asking price, I insist." So let's just say 2 months later, we'd moved into our dream home. My husband had his new job in town, and right now I'm lying in my bed, almost refusing to get up. Who knew that a move could be this debilitating? My cell phone has annoyingly rung numerous times, like an obnoxious, irritating, demanding person that wants to get your attention and will stop at nothing to get it. I almost want to hit it over the head with my hairdryer until I've smashed it into smithereens. I've abandoned it, rather like a noxious bad smell. Frankly, I don't care if the whole of Boston is trying to get hold of me. I don't want to speak to anyone right now. I want to be left alone with my thoughts, alone with my fatigue, alone in my brand new environment and my new home. alone with these god-awful boxes that plague and untidily litter the rooms and passageways of my home, like an unwanted disease that I simply don't want to address. Procrastination and denial is just so much easier than dealing with the chaotic upheaval of all this stuff. I want to walk along the sweeping beach overlooking the lake outside. I want to drink in the delicious views, sip the fresh air, not deal with the laborious, daunting, intruding obstacles of this mayhem that are constantly poking me in the gut and reminding me that they need to be attended to and unpacked. I don't know how I managed to manoeuvre myself out of bed that morning, but somehow I do. At some point you've got to get out of bed. But if I had my way, I would be marooned on this bed for 24 hours like an island in the Pacific, basking in the sunshine of my sleep. I quickly move over to the windows and pull the curtains, my eyes immediately drawn to the shimmering light of the new morning, all the new afternoon, shall I say, glittering across the lake, surrounded by its sweep of sandy beach, serenaded by the tall viridescent trees. I'm reminded of why I moved here in the first place. I knew in my heart it was the right decision to make. I throw on my dressing gown and make my way to the bathroom. A warm shower is going to ease away the muscular tension that has tightened every part of my body, so that even my legs are aching, and the area between my shoulder blades and around my neck feels incredibly stiff and unyielding. I throw my clothes in a messy puddle on the floor, and naked I step into the shower, closing the glass doors behind me, and allowing the invigorating, gushing warm water to trickle down my body. I gasp in appreciation as the warm water melts away the aches and pains, refreshes and invigorates my body, wipes away the sleepy, sluggish cobwebs that gathered around my eyes. I soak in the revelry of this moment, shampooing my hair with a coconut shampoo. The foaming water cascades down my body in a plethora of white bubbles. I close my eyes tightly to avoid any stinging soap creeping in between my lids. Suddenly I hear a loud bang, an intrusive bang. My eyes open wide very suddenly, and that is when I see it. Through the dark mist of the shower door that has steamed over, a tenebrous silhouette is actually staring at me, but then quickly moves away and vanishes. What the hell? I wipe the glass screen with my hand to look through it more clearly, but there is nothing there. What was that? My senses are stirred with a tumultuous horror. I open the shower door as fast as a bullet, my head peering out. No one is there. Did I imagine that? I was sure I saw a dark silhouette. I wrap a towel around my head in a turban, throwing on my toweling robe, and I begin to race around the house like a frenzied steam train, but no one is there. The house is steeped in a congenial silence. I was sure, absolutely sure I'd seen someone standing there in the bathroom, looking directly at me through the misty screen door. I didn't imagine that. I'm sure I didn't. I even call out, "Hello? Hello? Is anyone there?" But I'm met with the echo of my own words. That is weird, I think. I'm sure I saw something. Sometimes when you think you saw something enter your visual space, so fleetingly, you second-guess yourself, doubt that you actually saw anything at all. I was probably tired, I tell myself. It was just a trick of the light. Perhaps it was just a dark shadow. I realise I'm starvingly hungry, so I pad into the kitchen. The kitchen clock is the one thing hanging on the wall, left there graciously by the previous owner. I realise it's lunchtime. No wonder I'm starving. I eagerly open the refrigerator to retrieve the leftover takeaways from the previous night. We ordered extra so that I had something to eat at lunchtime without the need to go shopping, as Tom fully appreciates how exhausted I am. But when I pull out the Chinese square cartons, I'm astonished that the food has all been eaten, and all that remains in the fridge is a bunch of empty boxes, which is incredulous. Now this really does surprise me. Number one, Tom would never leave empty boxes of Chinese food in the refrigerator, as we always throw out finished food as a matter of routine. And two, he would never have eaten Chinese food in the morning before he left for his brand new job. More to the point, he'd said he'd leave it for me to enjoy, because he knew that there was scant food in the house anyway. I feel so fatigued of late, and he knew shopping wasn't on the agenda. This is incongruous behaviour for Tom. He's a very thoughtful, kind person. But maybe he woke up with a raging appetite, an attack of the munchies. Granted, I do feel a bit disgruntled, rather cheated. I'd been looking forward to eating those leftovers. I managed to find some cornflakes and milk. That'll have to do. Which I eat hungrily, and I make myself a large cup of coffee to energise me. Caffeine always helps me feel as if I can function again. I then meander my way around a plethora of boxes that are like rocks scattered across the seashore. I quickly pull on some jeans and a sweatshirt from one of my suitcases, and then I saunter happily out of the house. It is a breathtakingly beautiful day. I'm going to thoroughly enjoy a couple of hours basking in the spring sunshine. As I amble over to the shore of Lake Superior, I just stare out at the twinkling depths. It's one of the clearest lakes I've ever seen. I gather for this reason it's known as the most oligotrophic lake in the world, which is why you can see to about 27 feet below. It's a great lake for swimming, I'm told, on a hot day, something I fully intend to do, but not now. I've seen some fish swimming around in the water. They look like trout. It's amazing how the water is frothing in white waves as it meets the sandy shoreline, so reminiscent of the ocean waves. The whole beach is freckled by large and small rocks. I choose to sit close to the edge on a rock as I stare out vacantly at the water, my head peering out at the blue sky, as I watch a couple of American kestrels circling the skies, hovering over the lake. I watch them for ages and ages through my binoculars and marvel at this magnificent sighting. I've always enjoyed observing birds. Out here I should be in my element, I suppose. I don't think I've ever felt as peaceful as I do now, in my entire life. Finally the kestrels fly away. I amuse myself by throwing rocks into the water. They skim above the surface and nosedive elegantly to the depths. I suddenly get the overwhelming sense that I'm being watched. It sends an uncomfortable chill running down my spine. I turn around to observe the landscape that fringes the lake, which in my case appears to be a combination of mountain ashes, white spruces, and paper birches. But I see no sign of anything staring back at me. But the only sound I hear is the engaging, pretty trills of the joyful bird song. Am I going completely mad, I wonder? Maybe I'm losing it due to my exhaustion. First I thought I saw a dark silhouette in my bathroom. Now I think someone is watching me, here by the lake. But there is no one here. Let's just say, slowly and surely, I begin to settle into my new home. But the fixation I had with my cell phone has been eclipsed by an extreme disinterest in the gadget that I'm now beginning to resent, like an old affair that I now want to end. In Boston, I was so frustrated when I had to recharge the battery from this thing and be separated from it for a while. But now I almost want nothing to do with the tiresome gadget, except at night when I'm watching YouTube videos and listening to stories. I love listening to stories. Everyone is complaining that I'm impossible to get hold of these days, and that my phone is annoyingly switched off all the time. I don't know what it is, but the countryside has made me meditational, much more connected to nature, and less interested in the beguiling allure of technology. How can I explain this to my friends, who are so used to me answering my cell phone astutely? On the first ring, I have to say. Something within me has shifted. I'm meditating a lot, doing yoga, taking long reflective walks that engage my senses. But I've also noticed strange incongruous things happening around my home, of which I cannot fathom nor explain. For one, the disappearing of the food. My fiancé insists he's not pilfering the food in our fridge, but it seems to vanish, unless of course I'm losing my mind, and am beginning to wonder about that. Tom suggested that maybe I'm sleepwalking, skulking into the kitchen in the middle of the night, eating copious amounts of food unaware, that I can't even remember eating. If that were indeed the case, surely I'd have put on a lot of weight. But I resign myself to the fact that maybe this is happening, or one of us is lying to the other about how much we're actually consuming. I once heard that many people are in denial about the calories they're eating, and the amount they really ingest far outweighs their own perception. I've always been slim, but maybe that is happening to me. Another thing that is also odd is I find things moved around the house, placed in odd places, like my car keys and my purse now hanging on the hook in the entrance hall. I'd never in a million years put them up there. So yes, bizarre things are happening, and I found a lot of my underwear from the laundry basket appears to have disappeared. What I haven't told Tom about is that I always have this feeling that I'm being watched, especially when I'm alone in the bedroom, or in the bathroom for that matter, or when I'm walking around Lake Superior itself. But I guess I'm just imagining all this. One night I woke up in the middle of the night with my husband fast asleep beside me. I opened my eyes to see a dark silhouette standing there in the doorway of my bedroom. I closed my eyes quickly, only to open them again, and the figure was gone. It sent chills down my spine. I thought I'd seen a ghost. "Tom, wake up! Tom, wake up!" I said, poking him in the back. "There's someone in the house. I saw a figure standing in the doorway. It was looking at me." Tom bounced out of the bed speedily. "You stay there," he said. "I'll check the house." But he returned back to bed, assuring me that nothing was there. "What did you see?" he asks me. "He was a middle-aged man, very skinny," I said, "dressed in bedraggled clothes." "Oh, my word, Tom, you don't suppose we've got a ghost here?" I asked. "Ghost, Tamara?" he had laughed. "Don't be ridiculous. Of course we don't have a ghost here. There are no such thing as ghosts. And even if there are none in this property. This house is far too young to have a ghost." "Well, then how do you explain what I saw? There was a human silhouette standing in the doorway." "You probably dreamt it," says Tom. "You woke up in the night having dreamt about a strange figure in the doorway. It was real to you. You believed what you saw was a ghost. That can happen. It's happened to me. It's called having a lucid dream." I was beginning to think Tom was right. I must have been dreaming it all. Then one day after shopping in town for provisions, I returned home exhausted from the shop, collapsing on my bed. And that is when, lying flat on my bed, my eyes just gaze up at the ceiling for some reason. I'm filled with the overwhelming sense that I'm being watched. It's a feeling that I've experienced in my home from the moment I moved in here. I had expressed my misgivings to my sagacious friends back home in Boston, who suggested the house might well be haunted. I informed them that no one had died in the house. It had been built and designed by the former owner. But my friend Maddie did not think that mattered at all. She suggested that the land itself might be haunted. It was for this reason I was considering inviting a paranormal investigator to my home, as things were always being moved, and the feeling of being watched perforated my life daily. Of course, my fiancé Tom thought it was all in my imagination, as he had not experienced any of those impressions in our home himself. "Maybe with all the time you have on your hands these days, you're seeing things that aren't actually there," he told me. Now as I lie back on my bed, studying the ceiling for no reason at all, a freezing chill teases my spine. The hairs on my neck stand on edge. My heart begins to pound violently in my chest. I see an eye staring down at me from the ceiling through a hole that I'd never noticed before. I'm in no doubt about what I've seen. I almost jump out of my skin, when a horrifying revelation hits me like a brick across the head. There's someone in my attic. They're looking down on me right now. My skin is crawling, as if 1,000 spiders are running down my back. I want to scream, run, get the hell out of my house as fast as I can. But I restrain my gripping fear, knowing that it could bring with it grave consequences if this individual in the attic realizes that I know he's there. So empowered by my intuition, I act nonchalant. I close my eyes again. I pretend I haven't seen anything at all, but I know what I saw. Bloody hell, there's someone in my house, and worse still, they're spying on me. No wonder I've always felt as if I'm being watched. It hasn't been in my head at all, nor has it been a figment of my imagination, nor am I losing my mind. It explains why food has been mysteriously disappearing from our refrigerator, and that things have been moved around the house. My house is not haunted. The figure I saw when I was showering, and the figure that crept into my bedroom one night, who was staring at me, was no ghost. He was real. I do not want the stranger hiding out in my attic to know I'm on to him, and fully aware of his presence. I need to call the police without the stranger being aware of my plan. I climb off the bed, trundling down the sweeping staircase. I know if I run fast, that might look suspicious. Finally, I reach the kitchen, exiting through the back door, grabbing a sharp knife from the kitchen block for protection, along with my cell phone. There is no way in hell I want the stranger to see me phoning the police. I'm sure he didn't know that I observed his eye in the attic, but I can't be sure about that. My whole body is trembling. The cell phone in my hands is almost slipping because I'm sweating so much. My body is shaking. My knees almost buckle beneath me. In a trice, before I manage to dial the emergency phone number, a shadowy figure dashes hastily towards me, plunging right into me like a car driving into a telegraph pole, throwing me off my feet so I lose my balance and fall back onto the driveway. He grabs the cell phone from my hands and runs away like a jack hare. He's hightailing it from my property. I am completely gobsmacked that for a moment I remain on the ground, my mouth hanging open like a Venus flytrap. Did that just happen? The man obviously knew I had seen his eyes staring at me from the attic. I must have given myself away. I must have somehow reacted. I managed to pull myself off the ground and give chase of the man. I can see he's possibly in his 40s, but he's got a good stride on him. But for some reason I unhesitantly follow him. The knife drops precariously on the ground, but I leave it lying there. I don't need it now. I continue running after the stranger, who seems harmless enough. He's possibly more afraid of me than I am of him. I'm absolutely enraged that he's been squatting in my attic. How dare he spy on me like that? Is he some kind of deranged pervert that belongs in a psychiatric hospital, I wonder? I've never been an assertive person, and courage is not exactly my middle name. But I run after him as fast as I possibly can. "Oi there!" I cry out of him. "Don't you dare run away! Give me back my cell phone now! Who the hell are you? What are you doing in my attic?" I'm wearing sneakers. He's wearing walking boots. He darts over the billowing terrain with a relative ease, rather like a mountain goat, while I'm a lot less nimble on my feet and lose my footing on 2 occasions over some gnarled roots that angrily jut out of the ground. I keep chasing this intrusive stranger. I do not know how long I run for in the forest, but I begin to slow down my pace when I realise that the man has long gone. I know I'm defeated. I didn't even get a good look at him. I'd never be able to describe him to the police, which is a discomposing thought that bothers me greatly. My breathing is heavy. The sweat is now pouring down my face. I wipe it away with my sleeve. I sit down on the forest floor for a moment, resting my body against a tree trunk. I'm still breathing fast. I feel as if I've run a marathon. I cradle my head in my knees as I try to assimilate everything that has just transpired, to make sense of it all. I know that I have no means of communication now, for the stranger in my attic stole my cell phone. He was trying to stop me from calling the police. That's what I imagine it was. I glance around at my bearings. I've never been so deep in the woods before, but it's so pretty, especially this late in the afternoon, when the gossamer light has softened and dances through the canopy, twinkling over the vegetation in a shimmering luminescence. That is when I see a dark shadow. Oh my God, it's the man! He's back, I think. I rise quickly to my feet, grab the nearest stick I find on the ground, and shout out, "Oi, I've seen you! Come out now! You can't keep hiding like this!" I quickly move towards the tree, where I'd seen the strange movement, and I find myself standing 2 feet away from what I only can describe as a female Bigfoot. You've got to be kidding me. Could this day get any weirder? The next thing I'm going to see is fairies flying from tree to tree. I begin to rub my eyes. I know this creature can't be real, but she is. I'm bewildered. She doesn't disappear from my sight, but stands there watching me through congenial, curious brown eyes that sparkle with a teasing amusement. It's almost as if she's saying, "Yes, I'm real. Get over it." She's such an intimidating, daunting creature, as her Herculean size is overwhelming. But I feel no fear. Her humanness means I feel affiliated with her. I think she's about 8 foot tall, 700 pounds, with long flowing dark hair, the colour of a black bear. It fringes her body in silken waves. She has large breasts and a very intelligent human-looking face. To my astonishment, I discover in her hand she's actually holding my cell phone. Where did she get that from? I'm amazed. I imagine the strange man I'd been chasing must have dropped it on the chase. She must have recovered it. She seems delighted with her new find. I point to the phone, which she seems reluctant to give me. She seems to like it, because it has a very attractive glittering bling holder. She strokes it with her fingers, rubbing her fingers across the glitzy sparkle that has clearly transfixed her. Her eyes just show this appreciation. I understand that she loves the casement of my cell phone. It's mine, I tell her, using my body language to try and explain my dilemma. Do you mind giving it back to me? I say, opening my hands. I point to the case and to myself, and she seems to understand. She looks so disappointed, as if she can't bear the idea of parting with her find. But despite her incertitude and her unwilling reservations, she still hands my cell phone back to me, with a vacillating, hesitant reluctance. I remove the cell phone from the bling casing and hand the casing back to her. She is delighted. It was the bling holder that had interested her in the first place, not my cell phone. I realise she must love fulgurating things that sparkle. And then I remember I'm wearing a little chain with an aquamarine stone given to me by my friend from Boston as a leaving gift. I pull it off my neck, handing it to the Bigfoot. She examines the stone with eyes that are so animated, so enthused, so delighted. And when she realises that I'm giving her the stone, she knows she's got a good deal going here. She lets out a couple of excited whoops and then glides away and is gone. But judging by her bouncing movements and her enthusiastic response, she is one happy Bigfoot. The moment I return home, I call the police. A couple of officers arrive at the house. They climb up the ladder of my attic. To my amazement, we discover a sleeping bag, a pillow strewn across the attic floor. I observe food containers that were clearly pilferage from our kitchen. That explains all the missing food. A drawing book of pictures of me taken in a state of undress. So whoever this man was, the pictures were very good. He was clearly an artist. And several items of lingerie that were missing from the laundry basket that I'd worn were lying amidst the bed sheets, which was rather unsettling and discomposing, I have to say. The police officer looks at me and says, "It seems your squatter enjoys indulging in voyeurism. Had a fixation on you," he says, running his gaze swiftly through the book of pictures done in charcoal crayon. "They're good," he says. "He's clearly an artist." "That's no consolation, officer," I explain. "He's been living in my attic, spying on me. The question is, who is he?" "I was hoping you might be able to tell us more about that," says the officer. "Did you get a good look at him? Can you describe him to us?" "He was middle-aged, mousy brown hair, about 5'11", bedraggled-looking clothes." "Well, you could be describing hundreds of men," says the officer, scowling. "Did you get a look at his face?" "No, I didn't. The officer has a beer can that he found in the attic, which he will take for DNA analysis to see if they get a hit. But I regret to say that the mysterious case of the strange man who was squatting in my roof was never ever solved. And to this day me and my husband do not know who on earth he was, and are none the wiser about this enigmatic mystery. The only good part of the experience was meeting the female Bigfoot, who left me a bunch of eagle's feathers outside my front door the following morning that I still have today. I've not seen her since, but I guess these creatures move around. But here is hoping, as I would love to see her again. I have no intention of moving back to Boston. Tom and I are now happily married. I've made new friends in this part of the world, and I no longer feel as if I'm being watched all the time, which is a huge relief. So there you are. That's my story.
Well, hello there. I hope you enjoyed the Omnibus edition. We've got many more coming our way for you to listen to. Sending you love wherever you are in the world, in North America, Canada, Kenya, wherever you may be. I send you lots and lots of love. Thank you for listening to my Omnibus, and I really do hope you enjoyed it, because that's the whole idea about it, is to give you some interesting stories to listen to. So until next time, goodbye and good night.